Hear all these stories anywhere you listen to podcasts on the Let's Read podcast. Back in the late 90s, I was a teen with hopes, dreams, and above all, a love of the wilderness. I got this from my grandpa, who I'm convinced would have become a fully fledged wild mountain man if he hadn't met Grandma, the love of his life, and settled down to become an accountant of all things. I'm told that if you met him in his day job, you would absolutely never have known what kind of guy he was. A short king, average build, shirt and tie, white-collar worker. But as soon as the weekend came, it was like Clark Kent going into the phone booth and coming out as Superman. Grandpa was like a 5'6" Rambo, rippling muscles hidden by his work shirt, a just total transformation. By the time I often went hunting with him, he'd retired from the office job, so I mostly knew outdoor Grandpa. And he was my hero. Me, him, my older sister Jess and Mom, we'd go hunting often. Grandma and Dad couldn't stomach it though. Grandma, because she actually hated the killing, and Dad because I swear that man was the worst shot that you'd ever seen in your entire life. In the end, he admitted that he was such a liability that he'd stay home and get ready to prep the meat when we brought any kills in. Many happy family times were spent on hunting trips, but alas, everything comes to an end. Grandma got sick and passed away, Mom and Dad went their separate ways, and it wasn't hugely friendly, so Dad and Grandpa never really spoke again. Jess went off and got married and had a whole family of her own, and Grandpa got old. I stayed close by. I ran a small general store in town, and he actually worked for me in his retirement, just helping where he could, but mostly sitting on a rocker on the porch. The store was doing a good turnover, and it was honestly worth paying Grandpa a wage to just sit outside the store being a local character who greeted customers and shared a tale or two. I honestly think Grandpa was the best friend I ever had. He lived in an assisted living home, and it was one of those where he was free to come and go, but there was staff on hand if he needed anything. I asked him many times to come and live with me and my partner, but he was having none of it. Said that we didn't need an old man stinking up the place with his tobacco smoke and whatnot. And I reminded him that I'd always had a crappy sense of smell and could barely even smell his huge stinking cigars when he smoked those. And he reminded me that my long-suffering partner had perfectly good olfactory senses, and he had a point. Plus, honestly, I think he had a crush on one of the nurses at the assisted living home and didn't want to admit it. One day, when I had a weekend off from the store and so did he, I went to visit him. Grandpa was more cheerful than usual, which was odd considering he was a pretty cheery old fella at the best of times. Seemed in the best of health, in fact. We played cards for a bit, and he was hooting with laughter whenever he won or lost, and eventually I asked him what was up. Something clearly had him down good. When he told me the answer, I was absolutely shell-shocked. I had to stand up and stare out of the window for a moment, and I remember it being a very dreary, rainy day, and that felt almost perfect right then. It was a letter from an oncologist that he'd been seeing, without my knowledge, and I don't remember exactly what it said, but the words brain tumor, inoperable, affairs in order, they're ones that stuck out to me. And I stared out the window for a moment and then turned to him, and I think this was the first time that I ever got angry at the old man. I asked him why he was so damn happy and how he could let me think something good was happening. And he just smiled at me gently and told me that I'd understand when I was his age, which was 82 at this point, that he was finally going to see Grandma again and his daughter. Mom had also sadly passed early by this point, and that knowing the end is coming when you're old isn't scary. It's like knowing you're about to get to the end of a good, satisfying book, and that all things considered, a brain tumor was a pretty quick way to go compared to some forms of cancer. I sat down and thought about it for a while, in silence, and then I looked up at him and I said, "Hey, Grandpa, Is there anything you want to do before the end, you know? And then his face lit up like he'd been waiting for me to ask, like this was what made him so happy. Then he told me that there was one that got away, and that there was a final hunting trip he wanted me to take him on. It wasn't easy. The old man needed a cane to walk at this point, and sometimes even a wheelchair. He refused that for the trip, of course, but we still had to make our way deep into the woods with one of us using a cane. It was extremely, extremely slow going, and what would have previously been a day's hike took us 4 days of stopping to camp, stopping to rest, stopping to talk. And I think that was the point, really. Grandpa just wanted to spend some time with me, away from everything, and it was like chicken soup for the soul for both of us. On day 5, we pitched up camp, and Grandpa said that this was it. This was the spot. He waited till the sun set, and then he sat me down and told me about the one that got away. And it was like a Bigfoot, he said, but it wasn't one. He'd first encountered it years back when my mom was a teenager and they had been hunting together one time. He said at first that he thought it was a werewolf, until we remember werewolves don't appear in broad daylight and Bigfoots do. At this point, I paused to remind him that neither of those things are actually real, and he waved my concerns away. Besides, he said, it was neither of those things anyway. I asked what it was, and he said it didn't have a name. It was like a Wendigo or a skinwalker, but it wasn't those either. He said he called it the Shatterpaw. And I asked him why, and he explained that he'd found footprints that day which looked like an animal's paw if it had been shattered. Hence, it forever became known in his mind as a Shatterpaw. And he then told me that he'd seen the Shatterpaw another 6 or 7 times over the years. It was hunting him, he said, or so he thought. He'd be out with us in the woods, and he'd look over and see the Shatterpaw just standing there in the far distance, watching him. He said he could tell the Shatterpaw wanted him, and it was sending him a clear message, like one he could hear straight into his brain. It wanted him, and one day it would get him. And so he told me this was the last chance to get the Shatterpaw first before it came to him one night and took him to whatever hell it had come from. Of course, my reaction was to very sanely assume that the brain tumor was starting to do its business, and maybe I'd made a big and dramatic mistake by bringing a dying man with a neurological condition out hunting. Something had stopped me even considering this up until that point, and now I felt like an actual lunatic. And so I decided to do the only sensible thing that I could think to do. I acted like I believed Grandpa about the Shatterpaw. We spent the next few hours clumsily, loudly stalking through the woods in pursuit of this creature that I knew didn't exist. I knew it didn't matter if we spooked it away because it wasn't real. And it was like 2 kids play acting, only one of us was a grown-ass man who owned a general store, and the other was an old fellow with a brain tumor who could barely walk. And here was the other thing. I did have a bit of sense in me. Little did Grandpa know, he was carrying a hunting rifle that I'd actually disabled at the store. The firing mechanism simply wouldn't work even if he tried to shoot something. And even without the Shatterpaw, there was no way that I was letting an 82-year-old man with a brain tumor and a cane carry around a deadly weapon. I might be dumb, but I'm not that stupid. Unfortunately, Grandpa was neither, but we'll get to that in a moment. Eventually the sun set and we cooked burgers over the camp stove and went to bed in our tent for the night. Now a few hours later, Grandpa woke me up by shaking my shoulder. "Can you smell it?" he said. I couldn't smell a damn thing and told him so. He waved dismissively at me, reminding me how bad my sense of smell was anyway, and then he added this sudden lore to the Shatterpaw that apparently it gives off this really strong stench, but only 10% of the population can smell it, I guess, like how not everyone can smell blood or cyanide. I thought about asking why he hadn't mentioned this earlier, but since it was all fiction, what did it matter? And so I told him that if Shatterpaw was out there, we should stay put. Now Grandpa says, no way, he's out there. Grab your gun, Sonny. We're confronting this beast. And then he was gone, out of the tent before I could say a single thing. and I figured that there was a tiny chance that there was at least some kind of mildly threatening animal out there, or even a person, so I snatched up my rifle. Weirdly, I noticed Grandpa had just left his behind, and when I stepped out of the tent, Grandpa had lit the bonfire. I looked around and asked where the Shatterpaw was, and Grandpa looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I think you know." And that's when he pulled the handgun from his waistband. He told me he'd known all along that I'd sabotage his gun, that he was sorry for stealing from my store, but he needed to be armed, that the real me would thank him if I was still alive somewhere. And then he pointed the revolver at me. His hand shook as he aimed, and tears started coming down his face. "You reek of it, boy," he said. "You always have. It took you one day, and it's been you ever since." "What? I'm not the damn Shatterpaw," I told him. "You know I'm not." And he denied it. He said it was him or me. He kept talking, and he kept stalling. Said that the only way that I could prove that I wasn't the Shatterpaw was if I shot him in the head, or he'd do it to me. I threw my gun to the ground. Grandpa looked confused and then maybe even a little bit ashamed. I told him I knew what he was doing, that he wanted to go out on his own terms, and that this was the best damn plan that he could think of. He was a die-hard Christian, so ending it all wasn't an option. And if I shot him believing it was life or death, I could forgive myself. I asked him if that was right, and he nodded as he lowered the gun. A big part of me wanted to be mad. How could my beloved Grandpa try tricking me into killing him? But then I realized, to him, he was putting his fate in the hands of the person he loved and trusted the most, and in his aging, decaying brain, he somehow justified it. I told him this isn't the way, and he nodded again. I took a step forward to embrace him and take the gun away from him. Everything happened at once. I heard a sound and saw Grandpa raise the pistol. Honest to God, I thought that he changed his mind and was about to shoot me. Instead, he yelled, "Get down," and I dived to the left like my life depended on it. The gun went off with 3 cracks, and I heard the sound of a body hitting the floor. I rolled over to look, and out of everything in the story, this is the most unbelievable part, I know, but this happened. It wasn't a Shatterclaw or a Bigfoot or a Wendigo or a Skinwalker, but while we'd been talking, a mother effing cougar had been creeping up on us and eventually was poised to leap on me just as Grandpa noticed it. And heck, the old man had put the creature down with the first shot, we actually think, right between the eyes. Brain tumor and palsied hands and everything. Well, there was no way that we were leaving proof of that kill behind, the greatest of Grandpa's career, and it took us 5 days to hike back with that dead mountain lion tied up in a sleeping bag. The extra days left us having to ration, and by the time we got back to town, Grandpa wasn't doing great. He'd actually started to develop a lung infection. Things declined pretty quickly after that, but he lived long enough to see that goddamn mountain lion taxidermied and displayed in my store, along with a plaque explaining some of the story. It's not there anymore, as I donated it to a museum about 10 years ago now in the honor of the old man, but I still have photos somewhere from the days before digital. Grandpa passed away in his sleep a couple of months after our camping trip, and I won't say that things went easy because cancer never lets you. But he went gracefully, and to this dying day, he would admit to me that the whole Shatterpaw nonsense of the creature secretly being me was something that he'd gotten from a TV show that he watched in the rec room. But there's one thing that he swore until his passing, and I cannot tell if he believed this because Grandpa was one hell of a joker. But he swears he didn't make up the Shatterpaw itself, and he didn't make up that very first sighting of the creature. And whenever I try to look it up, I can't find a single piece of evidence of a cryptid called a Shatterpaw, so maybe Grandpa really did see one and named it. I think he'd kind of love that as a legacy, so if anyone out there comes across this mythical Shatterpaw, please let me know, so I can let it know that it made an old man very happy in his last days. Now, I need to be careful with what I say here because I don't want to bring hell itself down on me again. This was one of the most terrifying things I've ever gone through, and I don't want to risk even the slightest chance of the same people getting mad. Because, let me tell you, these people are horrifying. They're worse than anything you'll find on the dark web, and I would rather walk down a pitch-black street in the middle of Birmingham, naked, painted in day-glow paint, than have to face these horrors again. Now, let me explain. I used to post a lot on Twitter, like terminally online a lot. I was one of those annoying bints who have an opinion on everything. Main character of the day? Best believe that I was there giving my 2 pence. Remember that bean dad guy who wouldn't give his lass a can opener or whatever? I barely remember it, but I do remember that I wrote a 7-tweet thread about the guy. What else was there? Oh, the black and gold or white and blue, that dress, Yanny or Laurel. I used to tweet at bloody Stephen Fry and Neil Gaiman like we were pals. Yeah, that second one aged right well. Now, one thing I really loved was the trending topics and hashtags. It was almost like a delicious menu of completely meaningless crap that I just have to have an opinion on, whether I actually had an opinion on it or not. I mean, why the hell did I get into a 2-day-long row with people about the YouTuber Ninja? I still told him to go suck a Dennis, thanks autocorrect, and managed to get into a row with Ninja's stance. The best part is, I thought the hashtag was about the guy from the Unford. And I don't give a crap about Fortnite, but I sure as hell know a lot about Tyler Ninja Blevins, after his fans told me numerous ways in which I deserve to get touched. All of this pales in comparison to the really terrifying event I got myself into, though, and it was for equally stupid reasons. I can't even explain who I'm talking about exactly, but I'll just say this. The hashtag I saw was a color combination I don't like, and it also happens to be a pop band of the K variety. Now, the irony is, after this whole incident, I actually listened to them and do love them. I also really love that song by Rose about meeting her at the Appetapate. Hopefully this is now clear enough without me quite saying any keywords that'll get me flagged up on Reddit, or if I'm especially lucky if you include this in a video. So anyways, what I saw was the hashtag of the band name, and I thought that it meant the color combination, so I posted hashtag band name effing sucks. Then I logged off, thought nothing of it, and went and had dinner with my boyfriend. When I next checked my phone and saw 99 plus notifications from Twitter, I had a sinking feeling. Could people really be that mad that I didn't like the color combination? So before even unlocking my phone, I said to my boyfriend, "Holy crap, I tweeted that I don't like black and pink together and I think people are really mad at me." He looked at me like I just told him that I'd run over a dog, and that's when I knew that I had absolutely effed up and was about to find out. He asked me if I was sure that's what I said, or if I said that I didn't like a very similar sounding band. I said that I didn't really know, and that's when he explained to me what K-pop stands are. Considering what a terminally online dumbass I am, how this escaped me baffles me to this day. We looked at my phone together, and it may have shown 99 plus notifications on my display screen, but in reality, it was well over 1,000 tweets. I can't even repeat some of the things that they told me should happen to me. I was told that I should be peeled apart from various orifices. One person wrote a 10-tweet fan fiction about me choking on centipedes, which they dug up from my profile and found out that I actually had a phobia of. Of course, this also involved a bunch of people sending me photos of said insects, the British and American kind. And you ever seen the first Terrifier movie? One Twitter user sent me a gif of the girl being sawn in half by Art the Clown up the middle. If you've seen it, you know what I mean, and they sent this to me 14 times. Thankfully, my DMs weren't set to public, but that didn't stop a few people I did follow from sending me abuse as well. No friends, of course, but just some folks that I had pleasant interactions with in the past. And the abuse did not stop. In the end, as much as it pained me to do so, I deleted my Twitter altogether. Over 10,000 banger posts completely gone. But of course, then they'd found my Instagram, my Facebook, my poor old mom's Facebook, my LinkedIn. They found the coffee shop where I worked, and that's where a big revelation came from, actually. I got called into work, and my boss, who was thankfully a good friend of mine, told me to listen to this. Our answering machine was full, and the things these people were saying were vile, terrifying, and threatening, or they would have been if not for the fact that about 80% of the callers were clearly under the age of 14. Yeah, I was being harassed and tormented by literal tweens. Some of them were older, sure, and there was some very camp-sounding Irish guy who went into detail about eating my toes. I asked my boss what she wanted to do. I offered to quit, and she said no freaking way, mostly because it wouldn't help. These people were nutso children, and they were going to keep calling whether I actually worked there or not. Instead, she and my boyfriend frog-marched me to the local cop shop, and we told them everything. Turns out there's not a lot that the cops can do when you're being harassed by feral kids. The sheer volume of weirdos harassing me had to mean that it was being organized from somewhere, but trying to pinpoint where was absolutely impossible. Where do K-pop kiddies even go to hang out? Tumblr? I have no idea, and neither did the cops, and there was nothing they could do or would do. Then it died down. The cult of K-pop kiddies decided to leave me alone. What a relief. Scary story over. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't insult a band. At least I came out of it unscathed. Just kidding. If you've ever run afoul of bored tween stan culture, you know they don't stop at normal things like death threats and harassment. And just when I thought it was safe to go back to normal, I went downstairs one morning to see something strange sticking through my letterbox. I got closer, wondering what the hell it was. Someone had shoved a dead pigeon halfway through my letterbox. It had gotten stuck, but not before, well, the viscera had squished out of its beak. And judging from the state of decomposition, I'm pretty sure that the pigeon had been dead for a while, so at least I don't have its death on my conscience. I tried to convince myself that it was just some coincidence. Some other random lunatic had shoved a dead pigeon through my door. But no, of course not. When I extricated the cadaver from its resting place, I found a black and pink ribbon tied around its neck. There was no question, and surely this wasn't some little kid. Of course, we told the cops, who dusted for fingerprints and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if they actually dusted the letterbox or the dead pigeon or what, but unsurprisingly, they found nothing. And that same day, my boyfriend got a Ring doorbell, and I guess that scared them off because nothing else happened at our home. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end, though. One day, I was on the other side of town picking up some supplies from the coffee shop that I worked at as an assistant manager. I'd parked down a side street and gone in to see our supplier, who hooked us up with a particular brand of imported coffee that no one else in town had. And as such, we had a kind of friendly relationship, so I hung out with the guys for half an hour, telling them about the weird crap that I'd been experiencing. When I emerged from the back of their warehouse in this absolutely nowhere side street that nobody ever went down, my car had been spray painted. Now I'm sure you can guess the two colors that adorned my little Honda Accord. "The cult remembers," is what it said on the windscreen. I called the cops again, and holy heck, not only was there a security camera in the alley, but it was working too. This time, the K-pop cult member wasn't some tween girl, but was in fact an adult man. I never saw him myself, and the cops handled it all because there was no need for me to be involved. He made no attempt to hide his face, probably because he had no idea that there was a security camera watching him. And I can only imagine how the officers reacted watching a grown man who I'm told was in his early 40s leaping around my car and spray painting pink and black graffiti all over it. Was he dressed in band merch? I wish I knew. It made me think, if lunatic fans like this can behave this terrifyingly towards me, what must it be like for the artists themselves? Imagine being Taylor Swift, for example, knowing that a muscly, bearded guy is out there threatening to kill people if they do you wrong? What would it take for his ire to be directed at his idol? Now, I wish the story had stopped there, but there was one more twist in this tale. A few months had passed and it seemed like everything had died down. Life had gone back to normal. We were out at a bar together and I went off to use the ladies' room. When I came back, a strange woman had sat next to my boyfriend at the bar. I watched from a distance, and I'm ashamed to say it, but I'm a little bit of a jealous person, and in fairness, in the past he's given me a reason to be jealous. So without thinking anything more of it than my boyfriend being hit on by a random woman, I just watched. She was all over him, touching his arm, laughing at his jokes, leaning in to whisper in his ear. And the asshole was eating it up like the chump he was. I watched, looking around the corner of the corridor leading to the loos as this woman reached down and began fondling my boyfriend. He didn't resist. He let her take a sip of his drink even, and then she leaned in and licked his freaking ear. I just crept closer, and that's when I heard her say the thing. She said, "How you like that?" And it didn't hit me at first. Despite being a victim of stans, I didn't really pay attention to their music. But then the woman, kissing my boyfriend on the side of the mouth, reached into her purse and pulled out a little card. A two-tone card. You guessed it. Black and pink. She tossed it down in front of him and walked away, but not before tipping me a little wink. So the cult of the band's stans had finally gotten their ultimate revenge. One of their nutjob fans had seduced my boyfriend right in front of me, and this sweetie little asshole had been enough of a horny freak to fall for it. The message was very clear and succinct. You play with fire, you're gonna get burned. But consider this. This cult ranged from middle-aged men to attractive 20-something women to angry tweens, all of whom wanted to actively ruin my life because they thought I'd been insulting their favorite band. And if you remember, I wasn't even talking about the damn band, I was talking about the color combination. People be cray-cray, let's read, I swear to God. I don't use social media anymore because you hear about terrifying cults like the Anthill Gang or Jonestown, but the cult of celebrity, the Taylor Swift stans or the K-pop girlies or hell, I don't know, maybe even Bowling for Soup diehards, they're all lunatics. People can find anything to worship, and people can find anything to use as an excuse to go absolutely frothing crazy. So I've been a listener for a couple of years, and it was my kids who got me into you. They know that I'm a big true crime and weirdness buff and sent me one of your Appalachian videos. And from that day, I was hooked. My girls keep harassing me to send you a story of my own, and I was always thinking, well, I never got stalked along the Appalachian Trail or kidnapped from a Walmart car parking lot or flying kicked by a homeless bum, so what can I share? And then they said, well, Mom, weren't you in a literal freaking cult in school? And hey, I guess I was. Maybe it's not as glamorous as that makes it sound, but I did go through an absolutely crazy, terrifying, unusual incident when I was at boarding school. So, I wasn't the best kid. My parents didn't really know what to do with me. I got into buttloads of trouble in middle school, and then the first year of high school was absolutely hellish. And looking back, I was incredibly grateful to my parents that they didn't just ship me off to some kind of military camp or allow me to end up in juvenile hall. Now, I don't want to go into the bullcrap that I got up to, but it wasn't anything you'd hate me for. I was just a little bratty who wanted to rebel against all the things teenage girls are supposed to be, so being rebellious, I was. And the compromise was to send me off to boarding school for 1 year, and obviously I hated it. I was expecting my peers to be a bunch of loser nerds who studied hard, played little, and made me look bad. Well, damn, I could not have been more wrong. On my first day at St. Jimmy's, not the real name, just a little Green Day reference for you, I soon realized that I was a very small fish in a pond full of piranhas. Now these kids, they knew how to be troublemakers, and I was honestly humbled. Any sensible kid would have kept their head down or maybe begged their parents to come pick them up, crying that they'll be good, I promise, just don't make me stay here with these lunatics. Me? No. I wanted to impress these guys. And when Laura, a absolute terror in my class, threw a chair and broke the window, I didn't want to avoid her. I wanted to be her friend. And when Brianna smuggled a townie boy into our dorm and, well, pretty much effed him, I didn't want to turn a blind eye to that. I wanted to help her cover it up. And when Chantel wanted to slash the tires of our math teacher's car for giving her a deserved bad grade, I wanted to make sure that she actually got away with it. I was desperate to please these girls and desperate to be their friends, and they barely even noticed me. Only one of them did, my only real friend at the time, Noelle. One day, I confessed to her that the others were almost like a cult. I said that there was something about them that just commanded loyalty and admiration, and it reminded me of all the cult things that I'd read about. I've been kind of obsessed with it, in fact. Noelle looked at me very funny and said, "You know why that is, yeah?" And I didn't, so I asked her. And that's when she told me. They were a cult, and they even worshipped a certain god older than time that she daren't name even. And if I promised not to tell anyone about it, anyone at all, she'd get me into their next meeting. Now, I didn't believe in ancient gods and all that kind of stuff, of course, but I did believe in the power of human persuasion and hysteria, and even as a teen, I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by the way people manipulate others and the concept of sociopathy and narcissism and peer pressure. I was also the biggest stan of The Craft, a movie that my parents swore was the reason that I'd gone all wayward. Now, it wasn't, but I did still love it. So how could I turn down the opportunity to join these girls and try to get an insight into what could be the very beginning of an honest-to-God cult? So I nervously followed Noelle out of our dorm in the middle of the night and avoided the night monitor. And then we snuck barefoot across the grass to the old caretaker shed, which somehow Laura had the key for. I stepped inside to this sort of mix of incense, candle wax, and underneath all that, the obvious smell of weed. The other three girls were handing out a joint, giggling, and they were sitting around a book that sat open in the center of the shed with 2 spaces from me and Noelle. Now, long story short, the girls told me that they were acolytes of a demonic presence called Anti-God, and they called themselves the Sisters of Sleep. Now, if this sounds familiar to you already, bear with me because, yeah, the thing you're thinking of is exactly where they got it from. I hope it's not a spoiler at this point to reveal that it wasn't really an apocalypse cult, and we weren't really serving any type of anti-God. Noelle and I sat around the circle and they rambled on about the Sisters of Sleep and how we had to do what anti-God commanded us to. The first task was that I had to cut my hand and drip my blood onto the sacred text that lay in front of us. They said the book took different forms of whoever looked at it, and the book that we saw before us would shape our future. Now for me, it was a copy of Jane Eyre, and now to this day I've never read Jane Eyre, and so I actually cut my hand and bled onto what I'm sure was the school library book of this Jane Eyre, and then Chantel made a big display of throwing her head back and rolling her eyes back into her head. The anti-God was speaking through her and telling her the task that he had for us next. Noelle leaned in and whispered that this was totally normal. Now, of course, I wasn't a complete moron, so I wasn't buying any of this. I knew it was some display the girls were putting on, some kind of play acting. But here's the important thing. They were including me. These cool, edgy, outcast, badass bitches were bringing me into their inner circle. And let me tell you, acceptance and trust is more powerful than any demonic ritual or cursed copy of a Charlotte Bronte novel. The diabolical act that the anti-God wanted the Sisters of Sleep to do next was to key the principal, Dr. Lanahan's car. I wasn't at all surprised when, speaking through Chantel, anti-God decreed that I, the new girl, should be the one to do it. The others wanted to test my loyalty to their group, of course, and hell, I'd done worse things than key the principal's car in my time. What was the worst that could happen? I'd get kicked out of a school that I didn't want to attend anyway? But I didn't get kicked out. I keyed her car that night, accompanied by Noelle, who kept watch, and she told me to write "The Sleeper Awakens" on the door. And I got as far as the sleep before we saw a flashlight beam in the distance and realized that we had to run before the security guard found us. And then the next night, back at the hut, speaking through Laura this time, it decreed that the sleep would be enough, as it showed my devotion to the cause. The next task we had to perform in honor of our ancient god was to graffiti the first-floor bathrooms, and this was our friend Brianna's job. This felt a lot less high stakes than what I'd been asked to do, but again, I was very aware that this was all play acting and they were just testing me. Now, Brianna was told to write "Send me home, bitches" on the bathroom wall, and I thought nothing of this at the time. A bunch of other incidents happened after that: vandalism, theft, pouring soap into the fountain, just a bunch of really essentially silly pranks. The most dangerous or risky ones always seemed to fall on me, though, as the new girl. And the last prank before everything went to crap was Chantel drawing a wiener on the English class blackboard. We had another meeting a few days later after that. Now this time, Noelle channeled anti-God. Once again, it was me who was chosen to perform the duty. Now, according to Anti-God, I still had to make up for only writing part of the message on Dr. Lanahan's car way back. Now, I should note here that Lanahan had been absolutely fuming about the vandalism. Called a special assembly and everything, and if the culprit was found, there would be absolute hell to pay. Now, via Noelle, Anti-God told me that I had to blow up one of the chemistry labs. Now, hold on a second, I thought. This was escalating pretty quickly, and besides, I had no idea how to blow up a chemistry lab. That's okay, Laura said. Anti-God had pointed her to a book that would show me how to make an explosive using chemicals that I could find at the lab itself. How convenient. I really didn't want to do this, and this was obviously too far to go for an imaginary cult that I didn't even slightly believe in, but just wanted to fit in. But these girls were so persuasive. They talked about things anti-God would do to me, but they were obviously talking about themselves. I don't even want to repeat them here, but these delinquents made it clear in no uncertain terms that if I didn't go along with their plan, they would do very, very bad things to me. The next day, Noelle took me aside, and she confessed to me that, of course, anti-God wasn't real, and the whole thing was just some setup. It was, in fact, some crap that they'd gotten from a movie called Prince of Darkness that they'd all watched last Halloween. I still never watched that movie either. It's still on the pile along with Jane Eyre and one other thing that you'll find out later. Now, I told her I knew, but that I really wanted to be friends with these girls. Noelle told me that's how it all started with her, too, and how she was essentially trapped, she felt. If she didn't do what they said, they had blackmail material on her that would not only ruin her, but shame her parents and possibly even land her in jail. Now, we talked for hours that night, and with Noelle's guidance, decided that the only real course of action was to set the explosion in the chem lab. So I did. Obviously, it didn't blow up the whole room or anything, it just caused a fire in the chem lab that did a little bit of damage. Laura had done her homework, and I forget the details, but I was able to set up a chemical reaction that gave me enough time to get quite far away from the classroom before it went off. And with Noelle and the other girls keeping watch for me, there was no chance of me getting found out. So that caused some chaos at the school for a few days. Everyone was focused on who'd blown up the chem lab, why anyone would do this, etc. So focused, in fact, that security was pretty lax when the other girls, without my knowledge, broke into the principal's office. They showed me their spoils at their next meeting. They'd stolen all of their permanent records, and this was their master plan: cause chaos at the school, then steal our own files so any past indiscretions would be wiped from the history. This was the late 90s, so it was before most things were digitized, I guess. Now, nevertheless, I pointed out that this really didn't make any sense. People had memories. Chances are those records were just the principal's own copies, too. Now, I tried to be as nice as possible. I was trying to help. I didn't want to undermine their plan. But wow, these girls did not like being contradicted. Who was I to disagree with their master plan of the anti-God? Was I some kind of heretic? And this led to just some absolute fight where I told them that I knew that the anti-God was just some BS from a movie and the whole thing was just some big joke. Now, they didn't deny this. In fact, they just laughed at me. They told me I was the one who didn't understand. Of course, there was no anti-God, no blood rituals, nothing like that. They knew Noelle had told me everything because they'd known all along that I never believed it. And that was why it was so funny to them. Because I still did all those things. They held so much power over me that they'd managed to create a cult through literal willpower and peer pressure alone. And then Noelle stepped forward. She held some book out that she'd gotten out of the library, Cults in Our Midst by Margaret Singer. And this is the third thing on the pile of things that I've never engaged with, but with this one, it's simply because the idea of reading about it would just be too scary, even now. Noelle then goes into a speech about how she'd read the book and how she and Laura had to make a bet that people weren't that easily influenced and couldn't be so easily bullied into self-destructive behavior that went against their best interests just to fit into a cult-like group. Noelle had been the one to insist they could. This whole cruel experiment had been Noelle's. The one person that I thought was actually my friend, the one person at that damn school that I trusted. The whole time I was just her plaything to prove that some human beings are weak and mindless enough to be influenced into cult-like behavior for literally nothing other than boredom. And I was chilled to my core. What was their end goal? They'd pointlessly stolen their own permanent records for what reason? And I found out the next day, the principal and some members of staff were waiting for me. They were holding a bunch of folders, all of which they'd found tucked under my mattress after some anonymous tip. There was also a note in my handwriting addressing my friends, saying something about how I'd stolen their permanent records for them and hoped that they'd be grateful. Their idiotic plan wasn't so idiotic after all, I guess. They'd framed me, and now I was getting kicked out of school all because these weirdos wanted to prove that they could convince the new girl that cults were real. And I guess when I didn't fall for the anti-God crap, they just modified their approach and decided that bullying and peer pressure was close enough to cult-like behavior. And when you think about it, I guess it kinda is. I got kicked out of that school and began the most depressing, bleak period of my life. My parents didn't believe me, of course. They just saw me as the ungrateful brat who'd thrown away my one chance. Thankfully, I was able to enroll in one of the local high schools I hadn't been expelled from. And there, I actually worked my ass off, graduated, and then went to college and eventually did my master's. And no, it didn't have anything to do with cults or criminal psychology. I never want to see another damn wannabe edgy cultist for as long as I live. I had a less than conventional upbringing, let me tell you. Firstly, have you ever heard of Ruby Frankie? So she was a YouTuber, although not like you, I hope. I'm sure most people know her. She ran that 8 Passengers channel and was eventually sent to prison for some fairly serious child neglect, along with some woman that she was shacked up with. And they claim to be Mormons, but to my knowledge there's nothing in the teachings of Mormonism and the Latter-day Saints that tells people to be that obscenely cruel to their offspring. Obviously, I'm not one of the 8 Passengers kids, but when that story first came out, I followed it with utter horror. At times I was shaking on the floor, actually in tears, and even my hubby couldn't console me. Only a cuddle from my beautiful 10-year-old daughter could snap me back to reality. I'm a mom myself, and I cannot imagine in any universe treating my beloved daughter like that. The Ruby Frankie story didn't disturb me just because it was horrible, though. It disturbed me because it reminded me deeply of my own childhood. When I finally escaped that hell at 18, I always kind of assumed that I had a unique, one-of-a-kind abusive upbringing, but seeing the 8 Passengers story made me wonder how many other families like that are out there. Families who, for whatever reason, become their own kind of cults. People don't realize that dangerous cults are far more than just weird hippies wearing robes and killing actresses, or moving to Guyana and drinking the Kool-Aid. There are cults of personalities, MLMs, that are kind of cults, and there are social and political movements, some of which start off with the best of intentions even. But cult behavior is always cult behavior, and the more people get wrapped up in their own cults, the more they start to believe their own bullcrap. And this is what I can only imagine happened to my parents. By the time I was born, the parental group of my family consisted of Mother Cora, stepfather Jacko, Auntie Brady, and her partner Uncle Eric. And then there was Mama Charlene, who wasn't related to us by blood, but was the matriarch of our family unit. Now, I was the oldest of the 4 kids. We were all instructed to call each other siblings. It was Brother John, Sister Sabrina, Brother Roger, and me, Sister Krista. Now, if it sounds weird the way that I've written these names, that's because it was. This is how we had to address each other from as young as I could remember. If we slipped up and missed the prefix, we would be punished. For example, one day I was playing with Sister Sabrina and I called her Sabrina. Auntie Brady overheard this, dragged me from the room, and smacked my palms with one of those beach sticks that the adults always keep on hand for regular punishments. And there were so many rules like this, and as a little kid who grew up with them, I didn't really question them. According to Mama Charlene, who we were to regard as an almost holy figure, these things were the decrees of our Lord. If we did anything that went against the decrees of the Lord, we would be punished. I do not remember what all the decrees were, but only because years of therapy and distance has allowed me to tune them out. Every day, we would begin our morning by reading through the 4 pages of decrees that we had to follow. We were not allowed to leave our rooms until we'd finished reading them, not even to use the bathroom. Of course, when some of us were really little, this led to accidents, and that broke one of the decrees. And here are the ones that I can remember. Don't dirty yourself. Address the family appropriately. Thank the Lord upon waking, even if just from a nap. Thank the Lord before and after meals. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. And then there was some of the more bizarre ones. We weren't allowed to eat any food that was orange because orange was a sign that it came from the devil. One time, Brother Roger asked why this was, and Mama Charlene caned him for questioning the word of the Lord, and then explained that the devil's flesh is orange. Brother Roger said that he thought the devil was red, and Mama Charlene explained that when you cut a red devil, they're orange on the inside. And so from then on, we unflinchingly understood that carrots, oranges, butternut squash, and similar stuff were just evil. Never orange candy, though. We weren't allowed candy, as tooth decay came from the devil, too. And fire was evil, too, because that was orange, so we weren't allowed to just look at fire. The adults cooked, and us kids had to do things like peel the vegetables, butter the bread, and tend the vegetable garden. And we had the last task because the shed was in the garden. The shed was where we'd get sent if we misbehaved too badly. The longest I ever spent in the shed was 3 days. Brother John was once sent for over 2 weeks. If we were locked in the shed, you were able to use the toilet in the bucket, which one of the other kids would just empty every 2 days. You were brought 1 pitcher of water a day and 3 slices of dry bread. When one of us had to enter the shed to bring food to our sibling, or empty that bucket, the punished child had to stand in the corner facing the wall. If they turned and looked at us, we were to report them to stepfather Jacko specifically. We were all far too afraid of stepfather Jacko not to tell on our siblings. The strangest part about this is that I never once remember stepfather Jacko actually punishing us. We were just for some reason incredibly afraid of him. It was just drummed into us from a very early age that we were not to feel love for our siblings. Even though we weren't all related by blood, we were all siblings in the eyes of the Lord, and thus feeling any love for each other was unnatural and unholy. The same went for the adults. They would remind us every day that they did not love us, and we should not love them in turn. The only person that we could love was the Lord. The one exception was on Mama Charlene's birthday. One day, we had to bow in front of her and tell her that for this one day only, our love was hers. And the reason for this was never really explained to us. Our house had various bookshelves, but we were never allowed to read them. All the spines had been covered up except for the Bibles. However, despite claims that we served and loved the Lord, we were never taught anything directly from the Bible. We knew nothing of Jesus, and in fact, I'd never even heard the name of the Son of God until I escaped that family. And we were taught to read, but we were taught from books that had been written by Mama Charlene in her very spidery handwriting. They were all books about the family, about Mother Cora, Stepfather Jacko, Auntie Brady, and Uncle Eric. Mama Charlene herself was never in the books. They were mostly tales of our family's adventures before the Lord burdened them with us children. The books referred to us as the albatrosses, a reference that I didn't get until many years later. Read the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner if it's not familiar. In the books, Mother Cora, Stepfather Jacko, Auntie Brady, and Uncle Eric had fun and wild adventures. They went exploring mountains, they visited these fairs, and they went fishing on lakes. They even solved mysteries. They had a pet and something that the books called a wuffalump. I'm not even joking. And I later found out that all but one of the books were just abridged versions of the famous 5 books rewritten by Mama Charlene to just peddle her insanity. And the book that used to scare me the most was the first book. Stepfather Jacko wasn't in that book, and instead there was a man called Daddy Cobbleton. Now, Daddy Cobbleton was a wicked man who tried to lead the others astray. He guided them into hell itself, where he peeled his skin to reveal the orange demon beneath. And there he did unspeakable things to Mother Cora, until Auntie Brady and Uncle Eric cast him into a fiery pit. At the end of the book, Mother Cora gave birth to me, Sister Krista, and the Lord sent Stepfather Jacko to the family. But then Daddy Cobbleton returned 3 more times, impregnating Mother Cora again and Auntie Brady twice, and each time they saw him off with weapons. And then Mama Charlene was sent by the Lord to protect us. And that's what the book said. And as I grew older and began to observe the reality of how the world worked, I started to realize that orange demons didn't exist. My siblings weren't hellspawn. The world that we lived in was very, very abnormal. Our house was very remote in the middle of nowhere, but occasionally we'd be visited by traveling salesmen, or families in cars would just drive past, and they just simply did not live like us. They wore fancy, wonderful clothes, not the basic sheets that we wore. The children had hair, not the shaved heads like we had. And none of us were allowed bedrooms. Up until I turned 18, the 4 siblings slept on mattresses in 4 corners of a room. Lines were drawn dividing the room into 4. If one of us entered into another sibling's quadrant after 8 p.m., we would be punished. And the punishment usually involved having our hands whipped or spending time in the shed. But there were other things too. Standing outside and having ice water tipped over us. Having to stand there while the other siblings yelled the meanest things they could think of at us. If a sibling wasn't mean enough, they would get punished instead. Now one day, Brother John took a Bible from the shelf, thinking that if he learned more about the Lord, he might understand why we live such a cold, miserable life. When he tried to open the book, it wouldn't open. It was just some prop, a sort of replica. Mama Charlene caught him, and that's when he spent 2 solid weeks in the shed. I genuinely cannot think of a single happy time from my childhood. We were encouraged to avoid human connection with each other. We were homeschooled, we had no toys, no TV, music was forbidden in the house, Sister Sabrina was caught singing once and all hell broke loose. The adults grilled her for hours on how she even knew what singing was, how she had learned to do that, etc. And she just said that she didn't know, it just felt like something that she could do with her voice. And as punishment, the adults made her eat a carrot. They told her that by ingesting the flesh of the devil, her voice would be forever cursed. It was miserable. Just this daily drudge of bleak nothingness. Every day was exactly the same, and yet I rarely thought of escape. Other than the view beyond the high fence and the occasional glimpses of passers-by that we could see through the rare gap in the wood, we had no idea what life was even like on the outside of our little house in the middle of nowhere. And then I turned 18. On my 18th birthday, the adults woke me at just past midnight and ushered me down the stairs alone. In the kitchen there was a cake, and it was unlike anything I'd seen before. Apparently it was just for me. At first I thought it was some kind of trick, but the smiles on their faces convinced me otherwise. I sat down and took a bite, and it was like heaven. Mama Charlene told me that what I was about to hear was going to be hard. Nothing I learned growing up was real. The world was a cold, harsh place, and she was a radical psychologist who had found a willing family to help her with her thesis. She believed that raising children without the concept of love and following a set of incomprehensible and inexplicable rules, and then introducing them to the concept of love and reality at 18 when they were old enough to understand it, would lead us to live the most fulfilling lives possible. She promised me that she taught me everything I needed to survive in the real world. She told me that all of them loved me really, and they loved all of us kids. And in her words, this was her thesis. Robbing us of our childhoods would enrich our adulthood beyond anything any normal person had experienced. I'm sure there was some kind of logic to this in her head. I'm sure that there was some kind of reason why 4 other adults had agreed to put their children through the coldest, most unloving hell to help her study her theory. Then came the kicker. Mama Charlene said it was totally my choice. They were not evil people, but I was now 18, and they wanted me to stay with the family and become one of the parents. I would now be known as Mother Krista, and I would mother a child of my own. I asked how that would work if Daddy Cobbleton would return, and she said yes, but that Daddy Cobbleton took the form of different men. I asked whether the Lord had blessed all of this, and I asked if she thought that she was doing the Lord's work. And they all sort of laughed at that. I think that's the part that hurt the most. The one being that I had loved, the one savior I believed might one day save me from this hell, and they didn't even care about him. They didn't even believe in him. I kept my calm. I said I needed some fresh air, and I walked out the back door. I sat on the ride-on mower that we used to keep the lawn trimmed, and I crashed that mother effer through the fence and just kept on driving. It was the first time that I'd honestly seen the outside world. At that point, I flagged down a car and they just took me to the nearest town and to a police station. And I just talked to them about everything. I expected my siblings to be saved and my parents to be arrested. But do you know what happened? They got a warning and 6 months of regular visits from CPS. It was ruled that nothing that they had done actually constituted child abuse. Apparently, lying to your children about reality itself is not a crime worthy of having your kids taken away. One by one, my siblings turned of age and they too left the cult that was Mama Charlene's family. We reconnected and started building our own lives. The first time we all got together and said I love you to each other, the tears did not stop flooding. And after I left, the family did start treating my siblings better. The presence of CPS kind of forced them into being a little more honest. By the time my youngest sibling, Roger, had left the family, he said it was almost tolerable. I've never spoken to any of the adults again, and I never want to. Maybe they weren't as bad as Ruby Frankie and her evil friend, but the psychological harm that they did to us with their made-up lunatic cult is something I still feel today. And from what I understand, the 5 of the adults still live together. Roger couldn't quite bring himself to cut them off, and he visits them and gives me updates from time to time. Apparently, Mama Charlene is suffering from aseptic necrosis. One of the pills that she has to take for it, a sort of type of ibuprofen, is orange. And I wonder what the devil makes of that. So the absolute weirdest crap happened to my grandpa a few years ago. I got the call the next day, but this is what he tells me happened, and based on what I found, I don't think the old man's confused. He's a bit of a vulnerable old lad, but he's still in possession of his senses. Now, it was late at night, and there was a knock at his door. Granddad lives alone ever since Nan died after she fell in front of a speeding lorry. Now, he was there and it kind of messed him up, and ever since, Granddad, who was an agnostic for most of his life, has been looking to find faith. And that's why when these 2 young Mormon chicks arrived at his door, telling him that he'd arranged a meeting with them, he didn't really question it. He just figured his memory had slipped and maybe it was normal for them to show up at 8 p.m. Now, this was before the movie Heretic had come out, and trust me, this isn't similar to that plot at all, I promise. Granddad didn't try and lock these chicks in his house or anything. Instead, he made them a nice cup of herbal tea and they sat down and chatted for a while. One thing Granddad told me was that they didn't really seem particularly educated on Mormonism. The more they talked, and Granddad's always been a theologically curious man, even in his agnostic days, the more he got the impression that these girls either didn't really understand the church that they were a part of, or simply didn't care. Sure, they had the literature, pamphlets, and things, but they weren't really able to describe anything that was in them. They simply suggested that they leave the reading material with Granddad and he could make up his own mind. Now, I've dealt with Mormons before. One of my best friends, Chris, is a Mormon, and I know firsthand that Mormons can be very passionate about their church and their beliefs, especially the ones that go door to door trying to convert people. Granddad knew this too, and despite his age and the fact that he was slowing down, this started to ring alarm bells for him. The girls were called Emily and Bella, I guess, and Bella started asking Granddad about Nan and what had happened to her. And of course, being an old fella who's prone to trips down memory lane, this led him to talk at length about his wonderful, beautiful wife Evelyn and the tragedy that took her from us. At the beginning of his story, Emily excused herself to use the bathroom. Granddad got into it, sharing tales of him and Nan, talking Bella's ear off, and eventually the grandfather clock chimed at 9:30 p.m., and Granddad realized that Emily had been in the bathroom for almost half an hour. He paused his storytelling and asked Bella if her friend was okay. Bella waved it away and said it was normal. Emily usually spent a while in the bathroom and not to be concerned. Granddad wasn't having that though, and I drummed into him over and over about scammers and weirdos, and he was already suspicious of these two ladies who were claiming that he'd booked an appointment with them. He argued that no, he would feel more comfortable if he went to check on Emily, and Bella clearly started to panic. Even though he was an old man with a cane, Granddad has a presence, especially a few years ago when he still lived by himself. Bella had no choice but to let him push past her and go find Emily. Emily wasn't in the bathroom. She was in his bedroom, sort of wandering around, looking at things, studying photos. Nothing inappropriate or anything he could accuse her of, but enough that Granddad really didn't want her poking around and asked the pair of them to please leave. Weirdly, they were almost too happy to go, and they left a bunch of pamphlets and literature for him to read when they'd gone. He went to sleep and had a pretty fitful night. He spent the night dreaming about hell, he says, and he kept waking up convinced that someone was in the room with him, and the "Lord will save you" kept bouncing around in his head. The next day, he called me over and told me everything. I was baffled. We searched the bedroom, and it didn't seem like they'd stolen anything, but I found a little black speaker stuck under one of the shelves. And then there was another by the headboard of his bed, and a third stuck inside a bedside drawer. They didn't seem to do anything, though, and they didn't appear to be listening devices. They were just speakers. Now next, I looked at the literature they'd left behind. The girls had told Granddad that they were Mormons, but this literature certainly didn't belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Instead, it was a strange fringe offshoot of the Latter-day Saints, purely local, and based on a quick Google search, they were not held in very high regard at all by our local Mormon population. In fact, a handful of former members said that they were basically a cult that tried to convince other people to make the church sole beneficiaries of their wills. One common through line I found with the few people who talked about this extremely fringe church is that their frail elderly relatives had all talked about having dreams in which the Lord told them that the path of the church was righteous. Some even said angels were speaking to them. I had a theory. That night I stayed over at Granddad's. He slept in the spare room and I stayed in his room working on my laptop until the early hours. Sure enough, at 1 a.m., the 3 hidden speakers crackled into life. They were simple, pre-recorded messages telling the recipient that the end of the world was nigh, and they could secure their place in heaven by joining this fringe church and signing over their worldly goods to them. It's a pretty known scam, but I never heard of one that actually uses audio props and targets elderly folk in such a sinister way. Obviously, we called the authorities and they took the speakers away and interviewed members of the church. No members of the church matched the description Granddad gave of Emily and Bella, so our theory is that they hired actors and crooks to play these roles, just so the church could deny all knowledge. Sadly, the investigation never went anywhere, and while Granddad avoided being a victim, I'm sure that there were other vulnerable old people who joined the cult, church, and spent the last days of their lives in poverty, waiting for a salvation that would simply never come. Me and my buddy Mikey used to go deep into the woods on a hiking exploration trip every few months. We still go, just not as often anymore, and that's at least partly because of the story that I'm about to share with you all. And it's about a time that we didn't get killed by a guy who wasn't Corey Feldman. Now yeah, I know pretty much everyone has a story about a time that they didn't get murdered, and as far as I know, Corey Feldman has never killed a guy either. But trust me when I say that this is the absolute best way of explaining what the story's about. Cutting out all the BS preamble that drives me nuts, I'm going to start the story with me and Mikey 2 days into our hike, sitting around the campfire frying up some meat. We weren't out in the wilderness to hunt, just explore and have fun, and we knew our crap and knew situational awareness and being mindful of our surroundings and all of that stuff, obviously, which is why we were a little surprised when, seated at our campfire, a voice spoke from directly behind us saying, "Hey guys, what's up?" We both kind of jumped and turned around in our seats, and you could tell that this fella was hoping for that reaction because he had this little grin on his face. That was surreal enough. But what made it even more surreal was that the man standing before us looked like Corey Feldman, the child star of The Goonies, Lost Boys, Friday the 13th Part 3, and more. I would have sworn on the Bible that this was the case. Corey Feldman, looking exactly like Corey Feldman would look in the late 2000s, but wearing those thick glasses he often wore as a child star. He was dressed in one of those military jackets that you could get in just about every store back in the 2000s and some camo khakis. He had a green military-style cap on, too. And I remember all this because, let me stress, I was 100% sure that I was looking at Corey Feldman. And when he took another step towards the campfire, I saw that he was not, in fact, Corey Feldman, because I happen to know that Corey Feldman is a pretty short guy, 5'3" or 5'4", and this guy was clearly a fair few inches taller than that dude. And he also had this little scar on his cheek that Corey Feldman does not have. But beyond that, if I'd been asked to pick this guy out in a lineup, I would have put the DVD of Stand By Me in the player. Now, trying not to let the guy know that he'd startled us, me and Mikey were saying something like, "Hey bud, how's it going? You out hunting? How's the game?" You know, those sort of questions. He said his name was Bucky to his friends. And before we even had a chance to invite him, Buck sat at a campfire and helped himself to a steak off the damn grill. "Want a beer too, Bucky?" Mikey asked. And Buck replied that his name was Buck, not Bucky. And I wasn't sure if he was joking or if he was trying to make a strong point to say, "Yeah, we're not friends, so you can't call me that." But the dude was chowing down on our goddamn steak, so in my eyes, they gave us the right to call him whatever we damn well pleased. Feeling a little impolite at his rudeness, I asked him how often people called him Corey. And he stared at me through those thick glasses and was kind of saying, "Huh? Corey? What are you talking about?" And I waited for him to laugh, but it never came. I told him not to worry about it, but he just pushed, and I had to ignore Mikey's stifling giggles as I was forced to say, "Well, buddy, you kind of look like the actor Corey Feldman." But Buck just stared at me. And then he says, "Don't you mean Adam Sandler?" "What?" And then he went on to claim that everyone always compared him to Adam Sandler, that he looked like the guy. And I'm sure most of you know this, but Adam Sandler and Corey Feldman do not look a thing alike, and this guy did not look like Adam freaking Sandler. I shot Mikey a look, is this guy yanking our chains, and Mikey was no help. but he just sort of girlishly was giggling behind his hand. Yeah, Buck said people say that I look like Adam Sandler, but my friends call me Kyle. Wait, what? I thought this guy's friends called him Bucky, and this got more confusing by the minute. He explained they call him Kyle after Chris Kyle, the American Sniper dude. But he doesn't like being called Kyle because he makes that guy look like a baby. Buck apparently was a trained sniper, and he told us about some of his best shots. I can't remember, and I can't be bothered to recount it, but the exact details of these claims, but let's just say that as someone with even a passing interest in long-range rifles and snipers who comes from a military family, you would have to be the most talented marksman to ever exist in order to pull off some of the shots that Buck was claiming, to the point that some of them were not humanly possible. Apparently, he stayed prone for over 3 days without eating and drinking and using the bathroom, just to avoid shooting a woman who was in the way of his target, a Taliban leader. Mikey, who was getting a bit drunk at this point, asked why the woman and the Taliban leader were having a 3-day conversation in the first place, and Buck looked at him like he wanted to bite his eyes out. Genuine, absolute fury at being questioned. It was enough to sober Mikey up, and let me tell you, that's no mean feat. The problem is, sober, insulted Mikey is a lot more confrontational than drunk, mocking Mikey. So when Buck told his next story, some elaborate yarn about ricocheting a bullet off of 3 different metal surfaces and saving a pregnant woman from a rogue American general who was clearly meant to be Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, Mikey called BS. Like literally he just said BS, and then started humming Ride of the Valkyries. Buck stood up fast and began to reach into the waistband of his pants. Both of us leapt to our feet, and within seconds, I had my own pistol trained on him. I don't drink, unlike Mikey, and I do carry. I'm the designated don't F with us guy when we go hiking because you'd be surprised how many times you'd need one of those. Now Buck says, Hey, steady on, guys. We got a couple of wannabe soldiers on our hands, huh? Excuse me, buddy. You were the one who was seemingly just reaching for a gun. Buck then says that he could tell that he wasn't wanted, but that maybe we'd better watch out, because he owned this land, he didn't, and had every right to shoot us, he didn't. And then Bucky stormed off into the trees, never to be seen again, by us anyway. Now the next day we packed up and continued our hike. We were just walking along chatting when suddenly out of nowhere we hear a crack, and a bullet hitting a tree about 20 feet away from us. Mikey and I are both like, what the crap? Is some hunter taking pot shots? And the idea that it was Buck for some reason didn't even occur to us. And so we call out, saying, Hey buddy, careful over here. And we're wearing these very high-vis jackets, all that good stuff, and then another shot rings out, and we can see it hit almost exactly where the first bullet had. Mikey and I drop to the ground, run behind a tree out of line of sight of the shooter, and try to scour our surroundings. There's no sign of anyone, and we both whisper, Bucky, at the same time. But it couldn't be. Those shots were accurate. Well, the second one was anyway. And we have a whispered conversation, shocked that maybe Buck was actually telling the truth, at least to some extent. He was an absolute crack shot, even if he was a crackpot. But what the hell could we do? There was no sign of him anywhere, and we're just sort of sitting ducks out here. I decided to put something to the test. I grabbed something out of my pack, a water bottle or something, and tossed it out into the open. The shooter fired, and it blew out of the air. This was a serious, genuine pro. And based on the directions the shots were coming from and the size of the tree that we were hiding behind, I knew that we were somewhat safe. So I called out, Hey Buck, buddy, you're not trying to hurt us, are you? There was no reply. Silence. And then another gunshot, causing bark to explode from the same tree he'd shot at before. Now maybe this was my inner optimist, but I took that as a no. Meanwhile, Mikey says screw this, and decided to run from one point of cover to another. My heart basically stopped. A shot rang out, and I expected to see my buddy crumple, but no, he made it to safety. And instead, the shooter had hit the tree Mikey was aiming to hide behind. He was toying with us, and it was some kind of sick game. We ditched all of our equipment so we could move light. All we brought was enough water to last us the day or so that it would take to get back to the truck. We figured if we really pushed ourselves, we could make it without stopping. Now, the whole journey back, the shooter was taking pot shots at us, but shots designed to prove that he was a cracked marksman. He'd shoot at this thin branch off of a tree, and then he'd land a shot directly in the whirl of some trunk. And it was honestly uncanny. And I'm almost starting to believe that that Buck guy was actually capable of the feats that he'd claimed. The marksmanship that he was displaying was insane, and not once did we see the damn guy. He'd been dressed in basic civilian military gear, sure, but not full camo. And besides, to stay hidden in the forest, he would have needed to change outfits at certain points, and it was like he was a goddamn chameleon, which I guess did fit with what Buck claimed. Eventually, after 22 hours of solid running and crouching and ducking, because who could tell if the shooter would finally decide to stop toying with us and finish us off, we saw the parking lot. The truck appeared, thankfully undamaged, and I say, Mikey, you did take the keys out of your backpack before you ditched it, right? And it says something about the type of terror we felt that he didn't even try joking that he'd left them behind. I had no idea if Buck was still watching us. Maybe he wanted us to get to the truck, think we were safe, and take us both out there and then. We waited for 5 and then 10 minutes, and then that familiar crack sounded, but it was far away and in a different direction. I can't explain how, but somehow it was almost like he was telling us that we were safe to go. We got into the truck, and before I got in, I noticed something resting on the windshield. It was a spent cartridge that I later discovered was some kind of Winchester cartridge. It had been placed there deliberately. I picked it up careful as I could in my gloved hand and slipped it into a Ziploc bag that I had in the truck, and then we drove to the nearest town and obviously went to the damn sheriff's office. The sheriff himself was on duty, thankfully, and I guess it was a quiet day as usual, because he came out to meet us personally. We told him everything, and about how we'd met this guy who seemed okay at first, but then became more threatening, and how the next day, he began taking extremely accurate yet intentionally avoidant pot shots at us. And the sheriff nodded his head, almost sagely and wisely, and we got the impression that maybe Buck was some sort of local character, and we were about to hear some wild tale. The sheriff asked us to describe the guy that we were talking about, and obviously we both said that he looked like Corey Feldman, kind of thick glasses, bragged about being a sniper, full of crap, and absolutely definitely looked like Corey. Now the sheriff asked us if he told us his name was Buck, and we said yeah, expecting him to nod and explain that Buck was some kind of veteran with PTSD, Rambo type or something like that, and we waited for his response. And instead of looking assured, the sheriff's face went white. He asked us to come with him and led us to the holding cells at the back of the station. He asked us if this was the guy that we'd met. Now, sure enough, Corey Buck Feldman sat on the cell bed looking dejected and very hungover. So much so that even when he saw us, he perked up a little bit and acted like we were his buddies, here to get him out of there. I went to say something like, maybe you shouldn't have tried to kill us, when the sheriff interrupted me. Now, the night that we met Buck, he came driving into town, blind drunk, and got pulled over for a DUI, and then he'd been locked up in the drunk tank ever since. Whoever had been taking these warning shots at us was not Buck. We handed the bullet casing over to the sheriff, but Buck shamefully admitted that he'd put that on our windshield even, so that clearly wasn't a clue. The sheriff promised to send a team out to investigate, but we had very little in the way of actual evidence, just a blow-by-blow account of a guy who absolutely could have killed us, but didn't. And when we tell that story back now, we call him the End. If you ever played Metal Gear Solid back in the day, that's kind of how we pictured him. Just some insane, super old dude sitting in the woods with his pet parrot, protecting his land from interlopers like us. He was never found, of course. The woods were a hunting ground. Bullet holes and bullet casings and bullet residue was all over the damn place. Buck seemed especially focused on wanting to help, and I think he was actually affronted that there was an actual sniper in town who was quote-unquote better than him. Weirdly, for some reason I let Buck give us his email, and we've stayed in touch over the years. He's still a complete oddball, what they call a conspiracy head, and his latest thing is that he's a victim of some kind of covert surveillance. But surprisingly, he's good for a beer or two if you're ever down in the vicinity, which, despite our run-in with the phantom sniper, sometimes Mikey and I still are. We don't go to that area of the woods. Maybe the sniper's sitting there in his wheelchair, dead of old age like that Metal Gear Solid guy. Maybe he's just blowing off steam between some CIA Black Ops mission because goddamn. So this is my dad's story, but he's giving me permission to share it with you after I got him to listen to a few episodes of the Let's Read podcast on a cross-country trip that we took recently. So we hail from Tennessee. We've always been a Christian family. Mom and Dad raised me with a strong faith in God, and I've raised my kids the same way. Now, I won't turn this into a love-in, but my faith has given me strength in life more times than I can count. The scariest and weirdest thing that's ever happened to my dad revolved around a church and a preacher, though. Growing up, Dad's local church left a lot to be desired. He lived in a small backwater town with a small backwater church, and while the town folk were plenty of God-fearing people, they didn't hold the local preacher in quite such high regard as they held our Lord and Savior. Dad can't even remember the old fogey's name, so we'll just call him Pastor Bake. Yeah, I know. Now, Pastor Bake was a pretty old fella in fairness, but old beyond his years, too. That's because he liked a bit of the sauce, you know what I mean? The local kids joke that he dipped into the communion wine, and Dad says that that was pretty much true. One time, allegedly, he was so drunk during a sermon that he briefly fell asleep at the pulpit before snapping awake. He was a harmless guy, you couldn't say otherwise, but he hardly inspired passion and confidence in people. Especially not in 1970 when the Vietnam War was still in full swing, people were losing loved ones, and the state of the world was terrifying and people wanted faith more than ever. It was kind of difficult to go to church on a Sunday morning and listen to Pastor Bake slurring his way through his latest sermon about some dry topic that barely had any relevance to the modern America. It was no wonder that attendance dropped until they'd be lucky to have 20 parishioners in attendance on any given Sunday. And then, the circus came to town. And I don't mean an actual circus, of course, although Dad does have some pretty cool tales to tell about a traveling circus that passed through one time. But no, this circus had a tent and a ringmaster, but there were no clowns or elephants in sight. It was one of those pop-up tent revival churches. It had a portable organ with a young and hip organ player, and it had a choir who would raise the proverbial roof. And most importantly, it had Pastor Trent. And if you've ever seen any movie or TV show that has a charismatic, larger-than-life pastor who throws himself around the stage, evangelizing the Word of God with enthusiastic abandon, then according to Dad, you've only seen half of what Pastor Trent had to offer. He was everything that Pastor Bake wasn't. Young, energetic, stylishly dressed, dripping with faith in the Lord, and most importantly, sober. The way Dad describes him, you'd almost picture Jesus himself. He had long hair that flew wildly as he gesticulated in his passionate sermons. He never claimed to be a faith healer, but he'd lay hands on the sick and elderly and they would swear that they felt better. Dad says that Mr. Rockford, whose hands had been crippled by arthritis, was able to reopen his store for another 3 years after Pastor Trent shook hands with him. Now, you might think Pastor Bake would have a problem with Trent setting up his tent revival in the nearby field, but even though attendance dropped to 4, including the organist, he seemed to appreciate the break, according to Grandpa's friend Steve, who still attended. Everyone else, though, was completely won over by Pastor Trent, and from the way Dad tells it, who could blame them? Now, bear in mind, Dad was a 16-year-old boy at this time, and even the most well-behaved Christian teen has other things on their mind than going to church all the time. But at least the way he remembers it, Dad would actively get excited about going to the tent revival each week. And then, one Sunday, something weird happened. Pastor Trent was doing his usual energetic routine, talking about how God loves us, how he's watching over the soldiers overseas and his soldiers in our country. And then Trent gets very quiet. Just full silence falls over the tent. Dad swears blind on his life that it felt like the heat in that place started creeping up and up and up. I mean, sure, it was summer, and they were in this big canvas tent and it was standing room only, but it had never been that unbearably hot before. You could see people starting to sweat. Old Mrs. Crabjoy even wobbled against her son-in-law and looked like she might actually faint. Pastor Trent froze at the front. He gripped the sides of the platform and looked up, and to the left, it was almost like he was listening to somebody that nobody else could hear. Dad says that you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody wanted to break the silence. Nobody even coughed. And then Pastor Trent clapped his hands together, making half the congregation jump. He started to say something and then stopped, like the words caught in his esophagus. He clears his throat and started again. "It's time for the church to move on," he said. And these murmurs ran through the crowd. And this Pastor Trent waved his hands to settle everyone down and then announced that next week would be the final service before they moved on from the town. Of course, everyone was devastated and nobody knew why. Trent and his choir ushered everyone from the tent and they were barely speaking. And for the next week, the town was just awash with gossip. What had happened? Why had the pastor frozen mid-sermon like that? Had he been listening to the voice of God? Now remember, this was 1970s, so there were no Bluetooth earpieces or anything like that. Everyone was poised for the final service next Sunday. Maybe there would be answers. In the meantime, Pastor Bake was on a decline. On the Wednesday, he was found stumbling around the town square at night, 3 sheets to the wind, rambling about how the devil was here to take us all away from him. And the sheriff had to lock the poor old guy up in some drunk tank and try to get some sense out of him. And now the sheriff was Grandpa's old pal, so Dad, hearing this from Grandpa secondhand, apparently the sheriff flat out asked Bake if he was talking about Pastor Trent, if Trent was the devil come to take us away. Pastor Bake said no, it wasn't Trent. Trent was a man of God. The townsfolk arrived at the tent that Sunday, at least most of them did, and the tent was still there. Pastor Trent was not, though. The whole place had been cleared out. The pews were all tossed around and knocked over. The pulpit had been smashed, but the electric organ was gone and so was the generator. So were the trailers that the pastor and his crew had stayed in. They'd left early and clearly in a hurry. And then someone named Jerry Charlton came running up. Had anyone seen his wife, he asked. He thought that she'd left for church before him, but he couldn't see her in the crowd. She was pregnant with his kid, so where else could she be? And then a few other parishioners showed up. The school mistress, her husband was missing. He was a meek, timid man who everyone joked had married a battle axe. And as the day went on, it came to pass that 12 people had disappeared along with Pastor Trent and his choir. Most of them were people who had been in unhappy relationships. One of them was an 18-year-old girl who, rumor had it, was being abused by her stepdad. One of the 2 of the missing had no scandalous gossip surrounding them, but like Dad said, you just never know. It soon became the popular explanation that somehow all these people would run away with Pastor Trent and his church. And then talk extended to Pastor Trent himself. The Manson family had recently dominated the news, obviously with their murder of Sharon Tate. Was Pastor Trent even really a pastor? Or was he some kind of cult leader like Charlie who lured vulnerable people away with false pretenses? A lot of this gossip occurred in the most natural meeting place for the whole town, church. Pastor Bake was back on his feet by this time, and it seemed like his time in the drunk tank had scared him a little straight. And when he overheard the talk about Pastor Trent, it was like the old fiery Pastor Bake of yore had returned. How dare people say this about a man like Pastor Trent? Trent was one of God's soldiers. the devil had been coming to our town and had his sights set on the missing 12. And like an angelic Pied Piper, Pastor Trent had led them to Heaven's Gate. Of course, this explanation did not sit well with pretty much anyone and doesn't sit right with Dad to this day. I mean, that could mean anything, couldn't it? Were these people victims of abuse who Trent helped save? Is that what Pastor Bake believed in regards to the devil coming for them? And what did he mean by leading them to Heaven's Gate? There is an addendum to this weird and unusual tale, though. Everyone who disappeared was a grown adult, and there was no evidence of foul play. Given the volume of people who disappeared and the testimonies that they all had troubled family lives, the cops weren't prepared to treat any of it as a missing persons case. But Jerry Charlton wouldn't leave it at that, and he scoured the damn country looking for Pastor Trent and his tent revival church. Every time he returned home, he had absolute murder in his eyes, vowing that whenever he found Trent, he would demand answers about his wife and then send the man to the Lord himself. It took him almost 8 years, but he found them. None of the missing people were present at the tent revival. But not only that, Jerry Charlton refused to talk about what transpired when he finally met Pastor Trent again. All he would tell us is that Pastor Trent was a man of God, and that wherever our missing loved ones were, they were in a better place. Dad's theory is that Pastor Trent and his choir were running some kind of underground railroad for victims of domestic abuse. I've heard of traveling tent revival churches doing similar things, albeit many, many years later. I think I agree with Dad. Pastor Trent was helping people escape their bad situations, and maybe Pastor Bake even knew about it. And that's what he meant about the devil, because maybe all those people who disappeared were at the end of their rope, so to speak. But even if that is true, even if Pastor Trent did lead these people to a better life, it still chills me to think about it. Because Jerry Charlton had murder in his eyes every single time he set out in pursuit of that church. And then when he finally found Pastor Trent again, he returned a changed man and would never speak about why. There's one thing Dad and I know for sure. Whatever happened between Jerry Charlton and Pastor Trent, it sure as heck put the fear of God into him. Back in the 90s, myself and a couple of girlfriends used to go wilderness hiking. We were extremely into it, kind of our whole personalities. I loved it and so did the others, Sarah and Ashley, and we decided to go on a 2-day exploration. We drove as deep into the woods as we could and decided to just spend the day there and then camp there overnight. We parked on a dirt road and hiked until midday, then settled down for some food. Now, keen to get going, we ate a little bit and then began to explore the area. We'd never been here before. It was kind of an odd location. It was very deep into the woods, but the dirt track had allowed us to drive down here fairly easily. Ashley was a photographer, and she had some kind of fancy camera that she used to take nature photos. Now, this was before the days of digital cameras and camera phones, of course, so she had to be kind of picky about what she snapped. And that's what drew my attention. 1, 2, 3 photos almost in a row. I looked over to where Ashley was, and she was standing near a rock face. I couldn't tell what she'd seen, so I angled around and realized that hiding behind this curtain of vines was a cave. She'd been using her flash to light up the interior of that cave before going in. Sarah chastised her in case it was some bear's den, but pointed out that bears hadn't been active in that area since probably way back in the 70s. It was a pretty safe area this far deep into the woods. Ashley said that this may be so, but something had clearly been using the cave as its lair a long time ago. We could tell it was abandoned though, because there were some rocks covering the entrance which we had to clamber over to get inside. Now, this curtain of vines had fell over the entrance, and almost no natural light filled the cave. Sarah and I turned our flashlights on and we looked around. Now, it definitely had been some type of animal's lair once. There were very old remains littered in one corner, and then the dry, dusty, musky smell gave it an almost comforting feel. I could imagine a cartoon bear holed up there with its cute little cubs. Now, we explored the cave. It was actually pretty small and had a fire pit in the center. People had clearly used it as a camping spot at some point, which made sense given the slight hole in the roof and the fact that the entrance clearly used to be bigger. Sarah joked that it would be a great place for hotboxing, and I just rolled my eyes. We did decide to camp in the cave, though. It meant that we didn't have to bother setting up the tent, and even if it rained, it was sheltered enough that if we stuck towards the back, we'd be completely sheltered. So we explored some more in the daylight and then at night, and we settled down. We decided to cook on our stove outside the cave rather than risk filling the constricted area with smoke. It had clearly been a more open hidey hole the last time the fire pit had been used. We had a good dinner, and then went into the cave to bunk down for the night. We were woken up by the mother of all storms, though. Nowhere in the weather reports had it suggested anything like this. It was like Mother Nature had just turned on us. Thunder, followed immediately by lightning, and I could thank the Lord that we were camping inside a cave instead of outside in a tent. That is until I heard a crack, a crash, and a rumbling. I flicked my flashlight on in the direction of the noise and watched in absolute horror as a rain of rocks fell down over the cave entrance. Immediately, the meager moonlight was almost drowned out, with the only light coming in from the hole in the ceiling, which was a good 15 feet high, if not more. With nothing else we could really do in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm to end all storms, we tried to sleep. The next day we woke up fractious, sleep-deprived, and snippy at each other. And this only worsened as we each had to pee in the back of the cave, which left a fairly unpleasant atmosphere. And then things got even worse as we tried to move the rocks from the entrance, only to realize that they were far too heavy for us to move from the inside, not to mention rain-slicked. And we decided to sit down and just have some breakfast, lit by the meager sunlight that came in through the tiny gap in the cave ceiling. I hoped that our hunger abated and things would eventually calm down. I was messing with the rocks when I heard Sarah and Ashley begin whisper arguing behind me. They'd been at each other's throats all vacation, which wasn't hugely unusual, so I tried ignoring it. It was one of those situations where we all shared a strong passion for exploring the woods, and they were both my friends, so they were kind of friends with each other by proxy. The whisper arguing turned into raised voices arguing, though, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Ashley was accusing Sarah of having an affair with her partner, and now Ashley had a tendency to be kind of paranoid when it came to her partner Tyler, and for good reason. He had cheated on her a number of times, and sometimes I wanted to shake her and say just leave him, but she wasn't having any of it. Now, they were soulmates, even if in my opinion soulmates didn't typically screw other people. Now, though, it sounded like Ashley at least was convinced Tyler had actually screwed Sarah. And of course, this couldn't be true, though, as Tyler barely knew her, right? I expected Sarah to defend herself, and instead, she accused Ashley of being unable to please her man, so what did she expect when he ended up in another woman's bed? I stepped in at this point and just asked straight up, "Sarah, did you sleep with Tyler?" And she looked at me, and in the dim light of the cave, this look of shame on her face was very damning. And then she hardened up, just straight up confessed to it, stared Ashley down and told her that she'd done it with Tyler not once, not twice, but 3 times. And then, for whatever insane reason, she added that she'd let Tyler do things to her that Ashley was just too much of a prude to let him do. So maybe she should learn how to please her man a little more. And it kind of struck me weirdly at that moment that Sarah was a smoker, and I hadn't seen her smoke a cigarette since we'd holed up in that cave. Weirdly thoughtful, considering that she was out here ruining Ashley's confidence and life. I went to suggest that maybe she would light up and calm down, but then something even more insane happened. Ashley, calm, meek Ashley, who was kind of a pushover, full body charged Sarah and slammed her into the ground. Then the pair were fighting, pulling hair, yelling, and screeching so loud it echoed around the cave. In the end, this crazy cat fight is what actually saved us. Because a loud, deep male voice yelled down from the hole in the ceiling, asking what in the damn hell we were doing in there, yelling loud enough to wake the dead. I looked up, squinting against the sunlight, and I could have sworn the guy looking down at us was a member of ZZ Top. One of them with a beard, anyway. And I'd never seen a hairier man with a bigger, whiter beard. It was like Gandalf. And he looked like an absolute definition of a wilderness survival mountain man, which I later found out is exactly what he was. I shouted up that we'd been trapped in the cave due to a rock slide, and that we couldn't shift the rocks from inside the cave. He yelled back that he'd climb on down and see what he could do from the outside. You would think that this would have calmed Sarah and Ashley down, but no. They were still screaming at each other, trading slaps, and at one point, Sarah, the one who'd boned Ashley's man, grabbed a rock and was threatening to smack Ashley in the head with it. I heard noise above us, and then the sound of clattering rocks and masculine straining grunts. I don't know how to describe this any better than this. Imagine a mountain man doing a very strenuous activity. And if you select to read this story, please try doing this as a sound effect for me. Just me, though. Thank you. Finally, a medium-sized boulder popped into the cave and light came spilling in. The mountain man looked in, and now I could see that his beard was even bigger than I previously thought, and he also had one blind eye and somewhat of a scar, and goddamn if this dude wasn't the most badass man I'd ever seen in my life. It was almost terrifying. And then he got real scary. Sarah and Ashley were still screaming at each other, and Sarah had that rock in her hand. It was like they hadn't even noticed the mountain man trying to rescue us. So we hollered. Fully on screamed and yelled that if you gals don't shut your harpy yapping and quit disturbing the peace, then he'll skin all of us like the 500-pound black bear that he took down just last week. Quote unquote. I guess he saw the fear on my face as I turned to stare at him, because he gave me a wink and a little smile and gestured to the other two who had finally shut up and stopped arguing. With the mountain man's help from the other side, we were able to clear enough of a gap into the rock slide to allow us to climb through. Sarah, the largest of the group, was last to come through, and I honestly can't blame Ashley for refusing to help her, so it fell to me and the mountain man. Sarah and Ashley were still staring daggers at each other. The mountain man, who said his name was Bob, told us that he was going to take off and to drive safe now and maybe drop by the local hospital to check on the scrapes and bruises we'd gotten, especially Ashley and Sarah in their little fight. I just about begged the mountain man to ride with us. I genuinely, honestly didn't feel safe with Ashley and Sarah, especially since I was the driver, and if a fight had broken out while I was trying to drive, I was so exhausted that I'm not sure that I could have kept the car on the road. I guess Bob sympathized with me because he eventually agreed, and even though he said he didn't like to go into town much, his one condition, though, was that he was riding shotgun with me. No way was he sitting in the back with either of those crazy chicks. Fair enough. If you can picture Sarah and Ashley's anger as being enough to scare the toughest-looking elderly mountain man I've ever met, and likely ever will meet, you can probably imagine how icy the environment was. We drove the hour or so into town and went to the small walk-in clinic to get checked out. It turned out that Ashley had some kind of infection that she'd gotten from a cut and was actually suffering from dehydration, so she had to stay overnight. I stayed with Ashley, and Sarah decided to take a bus back to the city. I think it was the last time they ever spoke. And as a funny epilogue, Ashley decided not to tell Tyler that she knew he'd cheated on her. Instead, she called him up and explained what had happened. A couple of hours later, he showed up at the hospital. It was me, Bob, and Tyler in the room with Ashley in the bed. She tried to climb out of the bed, and Tyler thought that she was going to hug him or something. Bob knew different, though. He put a hand on Ashley's shoulder and told him he had this. And then he walked up to Tyler, moved as if to shake his hand, and then gave him a backhand pimp slap that was firm enough to undermine Tyler's masculinity, but not enough to do any damage. That's the kind of man Bob was, though. When Tyler looked stunned, Bob told him that maybe next time he'd think twice about treating a fine girl like Ashley the way he had. And I kid you not, Tyler's response was which time are you talking about? And I think that's when Ashley finally decided enough was enough. And from the way Bob looked at Tyler, I think Tyler knew it too. He turned around, threw the flowers that he'd brought for Ashley in the trash, and we just never saw that fool again. The only way to stay in touch with Bob, who lived off the grid, was to give him my mailing address. I realized that in modern day it'd probably be considered a bad idea to give a wild mountain man your home address, but Bob actually sent me a Christmas card every year for the next 8 years. Eventually, I received a letter from Bob's grandson, who sadly informed me that he'd passed away, but that Bob kept daily journals and an address book, and I was marked in there as highly important as a person to send a Christmas card to, which touched my heart in ways I can't even begin to express. And the only way for this story to become more of a fairy tale is if Bob's grandson, who wrote me and was around the same age as me, had met up with me in the city and we'd hit it off and eventually become a couple. But I guess I'll just leave it to you guys to decide whether that part actually happened, as it's probably too far-fetched to be true, so I'm not going to confirm either way. But I will let you know one thing. My firstborn son, who's a teenager now, is called Robert, and he has a strong love for the outdoors. I thought my ex-boyfriend was a great guy. I really did. So much so that I was willing to let him talk me into going deep into the woods hiking with him. I've never been a real outdoorsy girl, much less a go into the middle of nowhere with one other person girl. So yeah, I really trusted and loved this guy. But they say if you really wanted to get to know a partner, go on vacation with them. Well, I'll also add, go on vacation with them into the deep woods. That really shows what kind of person they are, like a complete and utter maniac, for example. We spent a lot of time preparing for the trip, days of discussing it, planning our route. Maybe I should have seen it as a red flag when my ex, we'll call him Aaron, bought all this brand new navigational equipment, including an expensive compass, satellite GPS locator, etc., despite telling me that he'd hiked these woods dozens of times and was a quote-unquote expert on the area. On the drive down, he talked incessantly about how beautiful the area was, how dangerous it could be too. And that's why we were doing a short day hike on the first day, and then spending a day in a nearby motel, having fun in his words. And then on day 3, we'd come back for a 2-night camping trip in the same woods. Aaron was right about one thing. These woods were absolutely stunning. Summer was turning into fall and the colors were breathtaking. I dabble with acrylic painting in my spare time, so really all I wished was that I'd brought some paint and an easel and could set up in the parking lot to paint some of the more beautiful foliage. I said this to Aaron, and he sort of glared at me and implied that I was afraid to hike through the woods. I thought he was joking, maybe teasing, and even so, my female pride kicked in and I responded, "Yeah, I'm gonna show you, buddy." And I snatched up my pack and told him to catch me if he could. Now this was fun for a bit. Leading him through the woods was almost romantic. And then he caught me, and it led to a bit of a makeout session, and I let him take over leading the way. And the scenario was kind of beautiful, you know. The day was so perfect that I didn't remotely let it concern me that there had been no trail markers or anything. Aaron knew this place like the back of his hand after all, so there was nothing to worry about, right? So we took a break for lunch. These pretty much just gas station snacks and all that kind of stuff. And then I took a roll of toilet paper out of my backpack and started to go off into the woods to pee. Aaron looked at me like I was a maniac and asked what I was doing. I explained that I had to go pee, and he acted like it was the grossest thing in the world, peeing outdoors, but also remarked that it was really smart of me to bring toilet paper with us. Isn't that common knowledge? And how did he expect to use the bathroom himself, especially on our later 3-day camping trip? I asked him this, and he brushed it off like it was a joke, but I got the impression that he hadn't even thought about it. And this was a red flag, Because surely a guy who'd engaged in all this wilderness hiking would know that it was necessary to at least take a piss in the woods. And he was a guy. All he had to do was whip it out and spray. I tried to convince myself that that was it, that maybe he didn't have that much experience with women. We were in our early 20s, and I don't know, maybe he somehow thought that someone with girl parts could just hold it in for that long. God knows why I let it go though, but I did. And when I returned, Aaron had packed up our things and was pretty raring to go. Based on the time and how long we'd been out, I figured that we would have probably started heading back to the car now. And when I suggested this to Aaron, he then responds, "Yeah, guess we should do that soon. I mean, I was thinking we could start heading back when it got dark, but..." Now, I was baffled. We couldn't be hiking through the deep woods in the pitch darkness, even with those X-Files level flashlights that we brought with us just in case. In that case, we might as well have planned to camp out overnight. I told him this, and he got very huffy and puffy and moody and said, fine, we just head back, and then started storming off completely in the wrong direction. Now, I'm not some expert navigator, but even I could tell that we were heading deeper into the forest. Now, I quietly suggested this a couple of times, and each time he got more and more angry, to the point that I started to genuinely feel a little unsafe around him. It was a side of him that I'd never seen before. I tried to chalk it up to maybe heat stroke or allergies or I don't know what. I kept asking him if he needed some water because I could tell that he was getting overheated. Eventually, he just snatched the bottle from me and took this huge gulp, allowing a bunch of water to spill all over the ground. And again, hardly something that a seasoned survivalist would probably do. And eventually, I had had enough. It was almost 3 p.m. and we were clearly heading even further from the car. I stopped and kinda did that hands on my hips angry girl pose, saying, "Bro, admit it, we're lost," I said. Not sure that I called him bro, but I had an affectionate pet name for him, but it's really icky to think about now. And he insisted that we were not lost, and hadn't I been listening to a word he said? And he was a seasoned hiker, and of course he knew that the sun would be setting soon. We were nearly back to the parking lot. I asked him to look at the GPS tracker that we'd spent so much on, so he just grumbles and says fine, and then takes the box out of his backpack. The sealed box. He hadn't even set it up or charged it or anything. He just brought the damn GPS tracker and somehow expected it to just work. And when I pointed this out, he almost threw the damn thing in a rage. I had to grab his arm and stop him from hurling it into the woods. Jesus. And I realized that maybe Aaron had a temper on him that I'd never seen before. I was out here in the absolute middle of nowhere with this guy, and he was quickly revealing himself not to be the guy that I thought he was. Very calmly and quietly, I suggested that maybe we check the map out and try to work out our location and piece things together using landmarks and the compass. I really wasn't being accusatory or belittling at all. But of course, little did I know just how much this was all insulting his pride, so I did not expect him to react the way in which he did. Aaron began screaming at me, calling me terrible things, all types of derogatory insults about how stupid and demanding and ridiculous I was being. And then finally he ended the rant by calling me an ungrateful C-word, which, wow, I've never been called that by someone who wasn't some catcaller or a stranger in my life. And even then, I was prepared to forgive him if he immediately apologized. But no, he said if I knew best, that it would be better for me to find my own way back, and he'd wait for me in the car. Because obviously in his mind there was no chance that I'd get back before him. And then he storms off into the forest, in clearly the wrong direction, while screaming one final F you over his shoulder to me. Up until that point, I'd still been considering reminding him that I had the keys to the car. But at that point, I said nah, screw him. I took a few minutes to gather myself, had a little bit of a cry and ate a granola bar, and then I put myself together and headed in the direction that I was certain that we'd come from. I walked for about half an hour, recognizing landmarks and even a twig that I'd snapped from earlier. I felt like I was doing pretty well, feeling confident and almost smug about the situation. And then I heard the sound of branches cracking somewhere behind me. and a voice. A high, mocking redneck voice, like the kind of cliche backwoods killer that you hear in some crappy horror movie. "You done effed up, girlie. You done come into our part of the woods." Something like that anyway. And I didn't even wait. I just began to run. Now, stupidly, my first thought was that I'd hoped Aaron was safe and that whoever this was hadn't got to him first. I had to be careful, though, not to head off the beaten track and still make sure that I was going in the right direction. Now, I could hear this unseen hillbilly pursuing me. He was running, somewhere behind me and up the hill among the trees. Occasionally, he'd hoot out some kind of threat, like, "I'm gonna skin your pretty little butt," or "that chest is looking real good mounted on a cabin wall." Psychotic things like that. And what followed was a chase worthy of a movie, or so it felt to me at the time. I was darting this way and that way through the trees, occasionally hearing this pursuer. Now in my head, I was picturing him as some kind of mix between Jason Voorhees and The Undertaker from WWE, even though he had a kind of high-pitched nasally voice, more like that one guy from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a movie that I'd actually watched with Aaron just a week or so before this, stupidly. Now I found a hollowed-out tree stump and ducked into it, deciding to listen for this murderous hillbilly. I could hear him, but he seemed pretty far away now, and he was yelling something about inserting something that I don't want to repeat into my mouth. I started to feel throw-up rise in my throat, imagining this filthy inbred monster doing all this awful stuff to me. I decided to use stealth from here on in. He was yelling about how he could see me, but from the positioning of his voice, I was pretty sure that wasn't true. I snuck through the trees, as silently as I could, and he was being pretty silent too. And then, creeping through the undergrowth, I saw a figure with its back to me, peeking from behind a tree. I almost called out and ran over there, but then the figure called out, "Where are you, little piggy? Piggy, pig, pig, I'm gonna put you on my spit roast." The voice had definitely come from the man peering around the tree, only the man was no redneck hillbilly monster. It was freaking Aaron. And then suddenly it dawned on me. Aaron acted all macho, but he'd later been a theater kid in college. One of his buddies had told me, and this absolute lunatic had been following me through the woods, trying to put the fear of God into me by play acting as some murderous hillbilly. The problem I still had, though, was that I had no idea how fake the murderous part was. I had three choices: sneak past him, confront him angrily, or treat him like a potential murderer and, I don't know, knock him out with a rock or something. I decided to go for a fourth option. I found a small rock on the ground and threw it as far as I could in the direction that Aaron was looking, and this dumbass fell for it like some crappy video game NPC. He started off in the direction of the sound, and I ran an almost crouch-walking way away from the location. Now, 10 minutes later, I spotted a huge, gnarled tree that I recognized from the beginning of our hike, because I'd so desperately wanted to paint. Another 5 minutes, and thank the Lord, I was back to the parking lot. I got into my car, and genuinely, honestly considered just driving off and leaving him there. But I figured the chances of the dumbass getting himself killed were pretty high, and I didn't want his death on my conscience. Plus, I wanted to find out whether he'd own up to it. I kept a small licensed revolver in my glove compartment that Aaron didn't know about. I stashed it on my lap under my purse and then hammered on the horn repeatedly, trying to guide him to the car. 10 minutes later, Aaron comes out of the trees looking embarrassed but still a little smug. And when he got into the car, I quickly started the engine and began to drive off. He didn't really say much, but when we were on the road, I eventually told him that the most terrifying thing had just happened to me, and that some cannibal redneck killer had stalked me through the woods. And I told him that I genuinely thought that I was going to die. "Did he sound a bit like this?" he asked, putting that voice on. Now I pretended to be shocked, like, "You heard him too?" And then Aaron began hooting and hollering with laughter, saying, No, it was him the whole time. Remember, he's an actor. Wasn't it hilarious?" I stared ahead at the road as I asked him if he really didn't intend to kill me. In his defense, he acted horrified, like he was simply too much of an ignorant, arrogant idiot to even consider the fact that it could have traumatized me. And we drove for a while in silence. He kept asking me if I was mad, and I think he knew that he screwed up. Eventually, we reached a gas station in a somewhat suburban area. It had a diner and a truck stop, and I checked, and I had cell phone reception. I told Aaron that I'd consider forgiving him if he went into the gas station and bought me a gas station hot dog. And then I waited until he was halfway through the gas station door, and then peeled out of that parking lot and did not stop driving for another hour. When I pulled into the next rest stop, I had dozens of texts from him. First they were apologies, then they got madder and madder, telling me that I was some stuck-up C-word and that I'd better come back and get him right now. I texted him back telling him to call an Uber or, better yet, hitch a ride with one of the truckers at the truck stop, and just hope that they weren't a cannibal redneck serial killer. Then I blocked him, and I never heard from that idiot again. I did check on Facebook to be sure that he'd gotten home safely, and he had. Hilariously, the post that I saw was actually kind of contrite, about how he'd done a terrible thing to a person that he loved and blah blah blah. Somehow most of the comments seemed to assume that he'd done something a lot worse, and a whole argument had broken out about him being a POS. I almost cracked then and posted to answer their burning questions of what he'd done, but I decided to let sleeping dogs lie. Absolutely the weirdest vacation I've ever had, the weirdest guy I ever dated, and thankfully the weirdest scary story I have to share at parties. Now I hope you enjoy the tale of the time that I wasn't stalked by a cannibal killer. I used to work as a bartender here in Toronto, at a couple of different spots too, but my favorite was the wine bar that was within walking distance of my apartment. It was a 30 to 40 minute walk, so I used that term walking distance pretty loosely, but my route was from Queen Street West to High Park North, some of the safer areas of the city, so before the night in question at least, I'd never run into any trouble on the way home. I was a woman of just 23 at the time, and I was acutely aware that I was putting myself at risk by walking alone at night. But after the first few journeys, once I saw how quiet and deserted my route was, I started doing it every night. I got so comfortable that I even started listening to music during my walks, but only in one headphone and only on low volume so I could hear things going on around me. But no matter how vigilant I was, no matter how quiet my route, I guess it was only a matter of time before my luck ran out. And when it did, it ran out big time. It had been a quiet Wednesday evening at the wine bar when we closed around 11:30. And then after a quick clean down, my coworkers and I were clocked out and headed home by around 11:45. We said our goodbyes, and then I headed off on my usual route, which at first took me through a bunch of quiet back streets before I turned onto a long, tree-lined avenue. High Park was on the left of me, buildings were to the right, with hardly any traffic at all driving up and down the roads. As I was walking, a rare vehicle passed me before turning onto the street ahead of me. I noticed in passing that it was a white van and paid just enough attention to recognize when it drove around a second time, taking the exact same turn. I thought, this van's just driving around in circles, so I wasn't surprised when I saw it coming around the block again. But instead of passing me, it slowed to a crawl at the curb and I heard the driver calling out to me. I took out my one earphone and I saw this tubby-looking guy with sandy brown hair sitting in the driver's seat, and then when we made eye contact, he asked if I was from around here. I didn't walk over to his window right away, I just told him sure, and then he responds, "Oh, thank God. Last couple were all tourists." Before he asked if I knew where this particular street was, I did know where it was, and I actually understood why he had trouble finding it too, because it was one of those awkward side streets with crappy signage that's tough to find unless you know it's there. And I started trying to explain where it was, but I quickly realized that I was explaining things poorly, so when he held up a map and asked if I minded showing him because he'd only forget what I told him, I didn't think twice. I guess this is the part where I explained something about the driver, something that had me lowering my guard in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. If this had been some creepy-looking a-hole, staring at me from his driver's seat sort of saying, "Hey girl, you got a man," then there's no way in hell that I'd walk over like I did. But this guy with the sandy brown hair and blue polo seemed a little, I don't know how to put this other than slow. He had this kind of childlike innocence about him, like he was too dumb to be bad. And when he mentioned something about helping his mom move into a new apartment, I guess I got this harmless vibe from him. But that was the point, because if I was the fish, then he was the lure, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker, as they say. I walked over to his window and he held the map out for me to point at it. But then no sooner had I touched the paper, the van's center door slid open on my left and a man came leaping out the back. The sudden noise of the door sliding open scared the hell out of me, so I jumped back on instinct before the guy's feet even touched the concrete. And then once it hit me what was really going on, when I realized how dumb I'd been to fall for what was obviously a trap, I started running as fast as I could. I tried to get away, but the guy chasing me caught up fast, so the best I could do was run for some railings that belonged to one of the buildings. And all I could think was, they can't get me in the van if they can't get me off those railings. So I held on to them for dear life and started screaming for help. As the guy wrapped his arms around my waist and started trying to drag me back towards the van, all I could do was scream, while holding on harder than I'd ever held on to anything before. The guy pulled so hard I thought my arms might break, but I knew that was better than whatever was waiting for me in that van. He tried pulling my hands free by the wrist, but I managed to bite him on the hand, like the real bony part on the back, so he screamed and let go. But he was so mad that he started trying to punch me, directly in the face too. I guess to try and knock me out so I'd let go. He pulled his fist back and swung at me, but I saw it coming and started shrinking down, so he couldn't do anything but punch my neck and the back of my head. He then started trying to kick my wrist so I'd let go of the railings, but every time he got close, I'd regain my grip as he lunged down to grab me. I was screaming the whole time, but after he failed to kick my hands free of their grip, he joined in with the yelling too and told his buddy in the driver's seat to come give him a hand. Now, I thought I'd done a pretty good job of holding that one guy off and stopping him from dragging me away, but I knew that the two of them trying together would be the end of it. So when I looked around and saw the bigger, tubbier guy opening up his door, I started wailing as well as screaming. I wasn't just screaming for help anymore. I was begging them not to take me, saying that I'd do anything if they just left me alone. But neither man was interested. They'd made it up in their minds about what they wanted to do with me, and there was no reasoning with them. But then, just as the bigger guy started walking towards us from the van, I heard someone yelling from all the way across the street, shouting for them to get their hands off of me right now. Someone was running towards us, wearing nothing but a robe, their underwear, and a pair of sneakers. But the thing that really caught my attention was the big old hockey stick they were carrying. The tubby guy ran back to his driver's seat the second he saw the guy with the stick, and then the scumbag trying to drag me off the railings did the same when he realized that they were suddenly in for a fair fight. He ran, jumped into the back, then as soon as he slid the door closed, the van took off, and the man running towards us had to dart out of the way so it didn't hit him. He took a swing at it with his hockey stick as it sped off and then turned back to me, running over asking if I was hurt and needed any help. He turned out to be the owner of a store across the street, one who lived in the apartment above. He'd been up late and had heard me screaming from the moment I started. He actually apologized for taking so long because he had to put on some clothes and grab his hockey stick. But I didn't mind because he was literally my hero in that moment. He invited me into his store so I could wait for the cops there and get something warm to drink. I accepted the invite, and within maybe 30 minutes, I was talking to a pair of Toronto PD officers with a mug of hot cocoa in my hands. I told them everything, not that they were of any help, and so did the store owner. And then once I was done, they were nice enough to give me a ride home so I wouldn't have to head back out into the dark after going through something so terrifying. I guess it was the least they could do, but it still meant a lot to me, as did the help that I got from Mr. Hockey Stick in his little furniture store, a piece of which now sits in my apartment as a kind of thanks-turned-memento. Not a memento of how I almost got abducted, but a memento of that perfect moment of compassion and kindness that led him to come running to my rescue in his underwear while carrying nothing but a hockey stick. This happened to me last year. I was taking a flight from Atlanta to Tokyo to visit my partner who was working over there. I get kind of nervous about flying, and the prospect of a 15-hour flight was not one I was looking forward to. I did everything I could in advance to ease the panic. I watched stress management YouTube videos, I listened to a relaxing audiobook at the departure gate, and I treated myself with an upgrade to business class. Maybe if I could avoid screaming babies and had a bit more legroom, things could be less stressful. Eventually, just before boarding, I decided that it was all too much and dropped a diazepam. I made my way onto the plane as one of the first aboard, stowed my bag in the overhead compartment, and settled into my window seat and promptly fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I'd groggily sleepwalked my way through the pre-flight checks and the takeoff, and was only vaguely aware that I even had a next-door neighbor in the seat beside mine. I woke up a few hours later, distinctly in the air and feeling a lot more relaxed than I had been when I boarded. Right now, I was alone. With nobody in the seat beside me, I gestured to the flight attendant and asked for a bottle of sparkling mineral water, which was delicious and refreshing and calmed my nerves. I noticed that someone must have been sitting beside me because there was a comic tucked into the front seat. I relaxed back in my seat for a few minutes when a shadow started to loom over me. With a heavy plop, my neighbor landed in his seat, almost causing my sparkling mineral water to spill. I turned to look at them and realized that they were already leaning in, looking at me, very closely in fact. They had a big ginger beard, bleach blonde spiky hair, eyeliner, a septum ring, various other piercings, and one of those flesh tunnels in their ears, and these very wide pupils. "I'm Declan," they slurred. And they thrust their hand into my lap, I guess for me to just shake it, and I managed to do so and then introduce myself. And I don't mean to be rude, but they absolutely reeked. I guess because they just come back from the bathroom, but good God, it was not nice in close quarters. Declan told me that they were non-binary and used he, him, and they, them pronouns. They went on to explain that they worked as some kind of MMA promoter and also a playwright, and then talked at me non-stop for almost an hour. And this sounds like I'm exaggerating, but they would not stop. According to Declan, they were going to change the worlds of both literature and mixed martial arts, and had been told that they had a unique and powerful voice. I wasn't sure about that, but they certainly had a unique and powerful body odor. Eventually it all got too much, and I had to excuse myself to get up and use the bathroom. Declan pretended to shift to let me through, but even with the extra space in business class, I was forced to brush and squeeze up against them to get past. I went to the plane bathroom and spent as long as I could in there without seeming weird. I didn't even need to go, I just needed a break from Declan's weird, intense monologuing. And when I got back, I decided that I'd pretend to nap or put some headphones in and listen to a podcast. Let's read, of course. And when I opened the door to the bathroom, I was met face to face with Declan, and I wish that I was making this next part up. It's genuinely disgusting to me to think about it now, let alone share it, but I think it's an important moment in sharing how effed up the next part is. As I tried to step out of the bathroom, Declan just looked around me, leaning forward, and then took a deliberate and very pointed nasal inhale as if to get a deep whiff of the bathroom after I'd used it. Ugh. Just typing it out again makes me shudder. And then they made direct, unblinking eye contact with me as if to say, "Yeah, you saw what I just did." "Sure did, buddy." And next, Declan put their arm out, in that kind of way that blocks someone from leaving a doorway. They did that, and sort of leaned forward, crotch first, to block me from leaving. And then Declan raised their eyebrows and suggested that I join the Mile High Club with them. Not asked, suggested. And then before I could even answer, they began gently but firmly stepping forward as if to make me back up into the bathroom. Now I'm like, no way, buddy, absolutely not in any universe. Then, my jaw hit the freaking floor when Declan asked if the reason that I wouldn't have intercourse with them in the airplane bathroom was because I had a problem with non-binary people. I was absolutely floored. Surely they had to be joking. But no, Declan was serious. They adopted a severe frown and genuinely started lecturing me on gender norms and innate bigotry. And I couldn't even react. It was like something out of a Twitter user's fever dream, but it was real, and it was happening to me. Declan asked if I thought that maybe I was rejecting their offer because I had innate prejudice. I held my finger up with my engagement ring on it and said no. It's because my future wife wouldn't approve of me joining the Mile High Club with some random stranger regardless of their gender. Declan's fists sort of bunched against the door frame, and they quietly but firmly punched the wall. It wasn't enough to cause any damage or commotion, but it was enough to send a message of, "I am stronger than you and I know it." And I ducked under Declan's arm and made my way back to my seat. On the way, I caught eye contact with one of the flight attendants and tried to give him the universal unspoken facial expression of, "This creep is harassing me." I think he got the message, because a few minutes later, after Declan stopped back into his seat with this thud, the flight attendant came over and asked if everything was okay. I said it was, and requested another sparkling mineral water in around 5 minutes as an excuse to have him come back and check on us. Now Declan was just sort of muttering to himself under their breath. I couldn't make out what they were saying at first, but when I realized, an icy chill went through my chest. Declan was whispering the most vile, unpleasant violence towards me. And I can't even repeat what they were saying because it would affect the video probably, but it was some of the most repugnant things anyone has ever said to me in my life. I couldn't believe it. First, the bizarre accusations of bigotry. And then next, some of the most vile bigotry and slurs you could even imagine. And when the flight attendant came over, Declan stopped yammering on, and then every time we were alone, they kept it up for the entire flight. I was trapped by the window for another 10 hours listening to this maniac just saying vague and nebulous threats under their breath. The worst part is, they did not directly aim them at me. They were just saying things about that woman, and I found myself genuinely just stuck. How do you report someone for threats when they're not directly threatening you? I guess in retrospect that I could have just told the flight attendant that Declan was engaging in this very antisocial behavior, but if anything, this story illustrates how easy it is for someone like Declan to completely make you freeze up. Eventually we landed. I waited for Declan to leave, and at first they didn't. They just stayed stubbornly sitting in their seat, still not shutting up with the yapping. No, eventually the flight attendant before ushered them up though, and they took their overhead luggage and left. Only then did I call the attendant over and tell them what had gone on. Now they quite reasonably, in much nicer terms, told me that I was a freaking idiot for not saying something, and then even encouraged me to tell the Japanese police. I was done with it all though, and opted not to, and it still bothers me to this day. I spent my entire vacation with my fiancé worried that I'd encountered Declan. Thankfully I didn't. I know this might not be the most directly terrifying story you've received, but being pinned into my seat having to listen to that kind of verbal cruelty from someone who thought that they were entitled to me and my body, it was so stupidly brazen that the reality of it still genuinely gives me nightmares to this day. Back when I was still freshly graduated and working my first real job in the city, some coworkers invited me to go for drinks with them on a Friday night. I had an amazing time, and it was awesome to get to know them in such a casual and different environment. And then at around 1 a.m, I decided to call it quits and take a cab home. I walked out of that club, and then I was on my way towards one of the larger streets where I was more likely to see a vacant cab when I realized that I'd lost my purse somehow. I knew the chances of getting it back that night were slim to none, and the best thing to do was just cancel the card and write off any cash in there as a loss. But then after calling around to some friends and family to see who was free to give me a ride home, I found out everyone with a car was either drunk, asleep, or both. I realized that if I was going to get home that night, I either had to hitch a ride with a total stranger or walk a heck of a long way on my own and in the dark. And since the idea of the first thing scared the ever-living hell out of me, I chose the second thing and started walking. I cannot overstate how glad I was that I chose to wear sneakers that night. I made steady progress away from the busier, more party-oriented areas of downtown and toward the more chill and less populated ones. It was actually kind of cool walking through all those abandoned places. They were usually just teeming with life in the daytime, and now they were very peaceful and empty. But it was also kind of eerie too, and I kept having to push the image out of my head of some creep jumping out at me from the shadows. I was careful where I walked, kept looking around to make sure that no one was following, and tried sticking to well-lit areas too. And then when I finally did see another person, I kind of panicked a little, thinking, oh God, please let them be cool. But my mini panic stopped right as I looked closer and saw it wasn't some creeper in a hoodie intent on stalking me all the way home. It was another girl, similarly aged and similarly dressed too. She was walking on the other side of the street as I turned a corner, and we were both walking in the same direction too. So when I looked over and we made eye contact, she asked if I wanted to walk together with her. And she acted super extroverted and friendly, and I knew two girls walking together was way safer than just one walking alone, so I figured, what the heck, why not? And she crossed the street to introduce herself. She told me her name was Kim, and that she may or may not have accidentally given her cab fare to a bartender who must have assumed it was just a tip. We joked about how she'd accidentally earned herself some good karma and that she'd probably get that $20 back somehow in the near future. And then the conversation continued as we carried on our way. And I think like maybe a third of the way through the journey, we saw a guy staggering out from a side street and start walking in the same direction. He was the opposite side of the street, so we had a nice safe distance between us. It also took him a minute to realize that we were there, and when he did, he started yelling stuff like,
"What's up, ladies? Need a little company over there?"
I did my best to ignore him, and so did Kim. But then under her breath, she said, "No, thank you," in a way that had us both stifling these giggles. Now, the guy asked what the heck we were laughing about, and at first he sounded pretty chill, but then he changes to,
"Wait, you two laughing at me, aren't you?"
And he started to sound very offended. And over the next few minutes, we listened to him yelling stuff like,
"Oh, I get it. You think you're better than me, is that it?"
And while at first he sounded kinda hurt in a jerk-off kind of way, he got angrier and angrier as we just kept on walking. Now in the end, Kim suddenly explained how her place wasn't far and I was welcome to come inside for a drink and a bathroom stop before I walked the rest of the way home. I actually really needed to pee at the time, so I would have accepted anyway, but having that drunk a-hole now basically following us absolutely sealed the deal. I accepted her invite, and then we darted down the next side street so we could lose our not-so-charming traveling companion. And when we heard him yelling, we picked up our pace a little, laughing at how outraged he sounded. I asked Kim if she thought he'd follow us, and she responds, "Probably, but watch this," before she turned us down another smaller street. We were completely out of sight, leaving the drunk guy yelling aimlessly in the street, and we only had to walk a few more minutes before Kim then says, "We've arrived." It took me by surprise, because we were walking past these super nice houses with gates and courtyards out front. I lived in a crummy apartment, but here was Kim, not too much older than me, and she had this really nice house. I was so taken aback that I kind of froze on the spot and told her that her place was amazing. Kim smiled like that was something she heard a lot. I couldn't help the barrage of questions that came next, but Kim was gracious enough to answer them for me. She said she lived alone and with a pretty hefty discount on the rent because she rented from a family friend. And I'm like, damn, I'm jealous. But in a sort of I'm happy for you kind of way, and Kim just sort of smiled before inviting me inside. The gate wasn't locked, so she just pushed the latch and opened it, and then we stepped into this cute terracotta courtyard with shrubberies on either side of a path. And there was a security light that turned itself on as we got closer to the door. But just before it did, effectively blinding me if I tried looking up, I swore that I saw a curtain twitch on the second floor of the house. Now, as we reached the door, I asked Kim if anyone was staying with her, and when she said no, I reached for her arm and stopped her unlocking it. She asked what I was doing. I told her about the twitching curtain and how it made me think that we'd been watched from the second floor. She told me it was probably just the alcohol messing with my eyes and that no one was inside. So I backed up a little ways from the porch and looked up at the windows again. The security light had turned off because nothing was moving on the path, which meant that I wasn't blinded by it when I tried looking up. And when I did, I saw the curtains twitch in a second-floor window again, clear as day, like I'd caught them looking. Now I'm like, for real though, is there someone in your house, Kim? We need to call the cops. But she snapped back saying I needed to chill. Just come inside, relax, have a drink. And she said a bunch of other stuff, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear were the alarm bells blaring in my head on account of the way Kim was acting. I might have been a little drunk, but I'm not stupid, and I slowly began to suspect the unthinkable. Kim wasn't just drunk and overconfident. She knew someone was in that house, and since all that seemed to matter to her was getting me inside, I realized things weren't as they seemed. At first, all I wanted was to call the cops, because better safe than sorry, right? But then once I realized Kim maybe wasn't who she said she was, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't even say bye or anything. I just turned around and walked back towards the gate. Then the last thing Kim said in character was kind of offended, saying, "You're not leaving, are you?" And then no more than a few steps later, I heard the sound of feet rushing up the path behind me before Kim suddenly grabbed me by the hair. I asked what the hell she was doing, but she was done talking to me, and she was done listening to me too. She didn't try to hit me or anything, she just tried to hold me steady, and then my eardrums felt like they were about to burst when she screamed right up close to me, "Get down here and help me!" I think hearing that sent me into overdrive, and I managed to push her to the ground before pulling my hair out of her grip. I felt that horrible burn as some was torn out from my scalp, and I didn't care though, because I was free to run towards that front gate again. But right as I did, I saw someone standing in the open doorway of the house. Someone huge, and they were there to chase me down. I ran harder and faster than I ever did during high school track, which, without blowing my own trumpet too hard, was pretty damn fast. And I only looked back once I ran through the streets, and the man chasing me was so close that I was going to burst into tears while running at full speed. So all I did was run and run as fast as I could till I saw a highway that had a few cars going back and forth. I ran out into that road and right into the path of an oncoming car, which obviously had to brake once it saw me. The driver was obviously pissed, but when I tried to show him what I was running from, there was no sign of the man who had been chasing me. I remember him stepping out of his car door a little to tell me to get the hell out of the way, and so I did. I staggered back to the sidewalk on shaky legs and then called the cops. Most of the walk back to my apartment was spent on the phone with the cops as I explained how I just escaped a potential kidnapping, or maybe worse. The dispatcher said that she'd have an officer visiting the house that I described, and then she gave me a case number so I could call back and ask about what they'd found. But I didn't need to, because the very next day I had a detective from the state police call me who asked if he could pay me a visit. He seemed super interested in Kim and seemed disappointed that I hadn't gotten a good look at whoever had been inside the house, which, by the way, turned out to be unfurnished and owned by a realtor who had no idea two individuals had broken in. They were gone by the time the cops showed up, and the only trace of them was a strip of masking tape attached to a wall that the forensics people said was clean. The detective said that while I've gotten very, very lucky, it was my smarts that had saved my ass in terms of figuring out it was a trap. But to me, it wasn't any of that. I got away that night because those sick freaks were too impatient, and Kim was too crappy of an actress to silence those alarm bells in my head. They might have been smart enough to get away with trying whatever they had in mind, but I swear, make them just a little bit smarter, and I'm not sure that I'd be around to be writing this right now. We were on a work/business in a South African country that I won't name because I don't want to start a debate. It was mostly a great time with great and diverse people. Now, towards the end of our vacation, though, something very horrific happened that honestly put me off returning to this country ever again. I was there with my fiancée, who is now my wife, and we had a great time, but I won't go into details describing all that because nobody really cares. Now anyways, just picture a generic couple having a generic good time and maybe doing some really cool things. However awesome you want to imagine we were, that's good. Now I'm being flippant, obviously, but it was lovely. The hotel was great, the food was divine, and once my meetings were out of the way, we had time to explore the cities and countryside. Now the country that we were in has this weird mix of quaint and modern architecture, which shouldn't work but really does. Now, tourists are advised to avoid walking alone in certain areas, and we followed that mostly, but towards the end of our vacation, I guess we got complacent, because everything had been so safe and stress-free up until then. Now, after an incredible meal with my wife, we went for a walk and just kind of got lost in each other, walking for hours hand in hand. I kept thinking about how I was the luckiest guy in the world, having this beautiful woman on my arm, especially knowing that she'd agreed to marry me a few months before. And there is nothing gayer than a man who's deeply in love with his wife, fellas, let me tell you that. Now, after a while, we sat on a bench overlooking a lake as the sun set, and we looked up at the stars together, and things were perfect. No, okay, I'll stop going on about my awesome wife now. She told me I was allowed to share this story if I promised to portray her well, so here you go, babe. I love you. She's awesome. Now, it was kind of her fault that we'd wandered so far outside the city, though. She was the one who wanted to look at nature and all that crap. But it was me who called the cab, dialing the number that I'd taken from the hotel lobby. We'd been promised that this was a safe, reliable cab service and had no reason to doubt it. When the driver pulled up, he was all smiles. We checked his ID, his registration. We confirmed that he was actually the driver listed on the cab company's website, all the steps that you're supposed to take. Then we gave him the address of the hotel and he entered it into his GPS. The driver engaged us in this very cheerful conversation, albeit in very broken English, as we began driving. I was sitting in the back with my wife. Looking out the window, it surprised me to realize just how far we'd walked. We were completely in the middle of nowhere, full countryside with no buildings in obvious sight. The cab's headlights and the moon lit the fields as we drove past them. And that's why I didn't really notice when the other vehicle fell into line behind us. After a few minutes, I caught sight of shadows in the driver's rearview mirror and leaned behind to look over my shoulder. I whispered to my wife that a van was following us and it didn't have its headlights on. She called out to the driver and seemed to do a better job of communicating with him than I had. And the driver glanced into his rearview mirror and then gave us this big, beaming smile and told us it was nothing to worry about. I said it was pretty unusual for anyone to be driving at night with no headlights. The driver said it was fine. Some people on these roads didn't want to be noticed and it was better not to keep looking at them. If they didn't want to be noticed, I said, then why were they tailgating us and getting lit up by our rear lights? And the driver just laughed and kept on driving. Now, a few minutes later, the van behind us flashed its headlights and hit its indicator in a very clear gesture for us to pull over. The driver glanced at me with these very wide eyes and said that we had to stop. My wife, bless her, told him that if he valued his life, then there was no way on God's green earth that he should stop, and in fact, he needed to slam down on the pedal and floor it the heck out of here. The driver wasn't cooperating, though. He pulled over to the side of the road and the van followed. Now, we sat there, pinned in the van's headlights as the driver got out and walked behind. We heard a bit of shouting and then footsteps crunching up to the door on my wife's side. My heart sank with dismay as I saw the driver, hands behind his head, being held now at gunpoint by another man in a mask. A second masked man tapped on the window with the barrel of his gun. My wife shrieks, flinching away, but the man gestured for us to get out. So we did. A third masked man slammed me against the side of the car and began patting me down. He proceeds to take my wallet, cell phone, and pretty much everything. My wife thankfully didn't have to deal with the pat-down treatment, but the guy took her purse and tossed it to the second gunman. Meanwhile, the first guy had secured our cab driver's wrist with what seemed to be this plastic tie and was guiding him to the back of their van. I looked and saw the gunman ushering the driver into the back and then slamming the door. The guy returned, and the three men commanded us to strip. Reluctantly, we did, down to our underwear. The men seemed to find this hilarious and began to insist that we remove our underwear too. Now, not wanting to seem weak in front of them, I dropped my boxers and just stood there, bare-ass and defiant, looking at them. My wife was crying, begging really, and as calmly as I could, I told them to leave her alone. I really thought I was going to have to try wrestling one of the men to get his gun or something if I wanted to protect my wife's dignity, but they just sort of sneered and said whatever, and then one of them said something that I'm sure was derogatory in Afrikaans. The three men snatched up our clothes and shoes. Two of them returned to the van, while the other got into the cab that we'd just been forced out of. Then, without a word, the men drove off, leaving us stranded, naked, and alone in the middle of nowhere. It sounds kind of funny looking back, but it really wasn't at the time, as we walked for almost 2 hours and the African night was a lot colder than the day. My wife jokes now that this was me making an excuse, but I'm genuinely grateful that we didn't get hypothermia. Thankfully, at some point along the route, we found a large discarded blanket that I turned into a sort of skirt for myself and a shawl for my wife. And eventually we reached a property whose owners actually kindly helped us call the cops. We were taken to the station, interviewed, and had to make some calls to the U.S. Embassy. It was incredibly stressful and almost scarier than being forced to strip at gunpoint. Almost. The cops really didn't seem to care all that much, not even when we told them that our cab driver had been kidnapped at gunpoint and probably murdered. Two of the officers even said something to each other in Afrikaans and then just laughed. Of course, I wasn't able to remember the name of the cab company either, and when I later tried to find the flyer on the hotel notice board, it was gone. My wife and I wanted to leave the country ASAP, but we had to wait for all the fun crap you deal with when your wallet and phone get robbed in a foreign country. The logistics were a nightmare, and this story would be an hour long simply from explaining them. The final development came the night before we were due to head back to the airport. Everything had been squared away, and we were extremely grateful for the fact that we'd been savvy enough to limit the things that we'd taken with us overnight, with our passports, most of our bank cards, and even my wife's cell phone all being locked up tightly in our hotel room safe. We had been out at a restaurant very close to the hotel for one final meal, and we were just walking home as the sun set. I heard a laugh that sounded distinctly familiar. Now, looking through the crowd, I locked eyes with a very grinning, cheerful man. Our cab driver. I was certain of it. He was sitting at a table with 3 other guys, and they were clearly celebrating something. Our eyes met, and I saw this look of panic crossing that cab driver's face. and by the time I forced myself through the crowd to confront him, he was gone. His 3 other buddies were still at the table, though, and they pleaded ignorance when I tried to speak to them in English, which was odd because most people in this country understand and speak some degree of English. They apparently couldn't understand a word that I was saying to them, though, when I asked them about the guy they'd been with. But they did seem to find me very, very funny. And then one of them pointed to my shirt and said, "Nice." I can't be sure, but I am certain that these were the masked gunmen. In some ways, it was a relief to know that our cab driver hadn't been murdered, and the chances are that we wouldn't have been either. I'm sure the guns were probably fake too, but knowing we'd been scammed by 4 crooks looking to make a quick buck off of the dumb tourists, well, that didn't feel much better if I'm being honest with you. On the other hand, at least nobody got shot. In November of 2010, me and a few pals of mine went out on a lads' night to celebrate our mate Jacko's 25th. We went to a steakhouse before a massive pub crawl, and then ended up in a club till about midnight when I decided to catch the last bus home. I wished the birthday boy a safe trip home, said my goodbyes to everyone else with hugs all around, and then I walked out of the club and started towards the bus station. When I checked the time on the way, I noticed that I was cutting it a bit fine, but I still thought I was going to make it. But then I remember turning a corner and seeing my bus at its stand in the distance, taking on the last passengers in the queue to board. I ran like the clappers trying to catch it, shouting for them to wait. But either the driver thought that I was just some mad pisshead on a tear, or he ignored me so he could stay on schedule. Because before I could even get close, the bus pulled away from the stand and drove off without me. I was absolutely gutted, not just that I'd missed out, but I'd spent so much money on scoff and ale that I couldn't afford a taxi. If the same thing happened today, I'd be able to move some money between accounts using my banking app, or get my girlfriend to send me some and then pay using the contactless on my phone, but back then, that wasn't an option. I also didn't want to dick a driver around by being all, "Look, mate, I might have some cash at home. Will you give me a lift on the off chance I've got enough?" And so, I bit the bullet and decided to just hoof it. After hitting the road, I called my girlfriend and told her what happened. And then after she laughed and said it sounded like I'd had a good time, I asked if she had any cash on her to pay for a cab. She didn't, but when she offered to get dressed and walk to the nearest cash point, I told her not to trouble herself. She asked how long the walk would take me, and when I said about an hour and a half, she said that she'd have some food and a nice hot bath ready for me by the time I got in. I thanked her, told her I loved her, and then said I'd see her soon. Now, the first part of the walk wasn't that bad, actually. I was still quite drunk and in a really good mood after seeing all the lads, so my spirits were high as I got further away from the city center. About 40 minutes in, and still with quite a way to go, I was walking on a straight stretch of road near the women's hospital. I was whistling Don't Stop Believing myself because it had been played at almost every place we went to, when I suddenly felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I thought it'd be my girlfriend asking, "You okay?" or "How far to go?" And while it was indeed her sending me a text, all it said was help. I hit the call button, hoping she'd hit send too early on a help me take the bins out type of text, but I only heard one ring before she forwarded the call to voicemail. When I brought my phone down from my ear, I saw that she was typing something, and when the messages came through, I started shaking like a pooing dog, because all they said was, "Someone's in the house. I'm under the bed." I told her to call 999. She texted back seconds later saying that she couldn't because the person inside would hear her. I texted her saying, "I'll call then," and then dialed 999 as fast as I could. I couldn't run because I needed to talk to the 999 lady, but I also couldn't just walk because everything in my head was screaming at me to run. And so I'm talking to this lady and I'm going back and forth between speed walking and jogging while panting down the phone about how my girlfriend needs help. It came out in a big word vomit as well, because obviously the most important thing was telling that lady the address so she could get the police there as fast as possible. And I feel terrible saying this now, but the way that she was talking back to me was so calm that it made me really angry. I remember there was a point where I was shouting, "Please, I'm begging you, someone's in the house with her." But in reply, all she asked me was, "Can you tell me what this person looks like?" In just the most nonchalant voice you can imagine. I lost my temper a bit and shouted, "Of course I bloody don't, because I'm not effing there, am I? Just get someone out here, please, I'm literally begging you." But all she said to that, in the same deadpan voice, was something like, "I understand you're upset, but I've got to ask these questions for officers, okay? They're on their way to your address as we speak." And when I asked how long they'd be, she wouldn't give me an exact time. She just said no more than a couple of minutes because they had a unit in the area. I asked her to promise me that they were going as fast as they could, and then when she did, I thanked her, said I had to go, and then hung up. I stopped to fire off one last text, asking my girlfriend if she was okay, and then started legging it down the road. I kept my phone in my hand, hoping it'd quickly vibrate with her reply, and then the longer it stayed quiet, the more scared I got. I played a lot of football back then, so I was pretty fit, but all that beer and sambuca in my stomach, I tried fighting it because I couldn't afford to stop, so when it came, the first round of vomit streamed down the front of my nice white shirt. I spat the rest out and kept on running, but once I'd started, I couldn't stop, and a sudden stomach spasm had me slowing to stop before I lurched over and puked again. I knew I had to get it all out, so I made sure to heave until my stomach felt empty, and once it did, I picked myself up and got ready to run again. But then I suddenly saw a light shining out to me in the distance. And at the time, it felt like it was light shining down from heaven. It was the light on top of a hackney cab saying it was vacant and on for a job, and when I saw it, an idea struck me. I could flag it down, explain the situation, and then swear on my mother's life that I'd get him the fare that I owe him if he just got me home to my girlfriend. At the time, I couldn't imagine anyone kicking me out of their cab after hearing that, so as the light got closer, I started jumping up and down and waving my arms till I saw his turn signal start flashing. The driver pulls his cab over, and I noticed that he had his passenger window open, so I'm thinking, explain to him there, then jump into the back when I get the go-ahead. But I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me up close. He looked well and truly disgusted, and then I remembered how I was absolutely drenched in my own sick. And he thought that I was just some lone pisshead having puked all over myself, and while I suppose that was technically the truth, it obviously wasn't the whole story. Now I'm screaming, no, wait. And as he drove off and then he sped off into the distance, all I wanted to do was scream at the top of my lungs. I didn't. It was a waste of time and energy, and since I've wasted enough puking up my guts and trying to flag down a cab, I got running again, as fast as I could, and I didn't stop until I could see flashing blue police lights outside my house. It was a relief to know that they were actually on their way like the 999 operator said, but I still don't know if my girlfriend was actually okay or not. And since she hadn't replied to the "you okay" text that I sent before I started running, I had this terrible feeling that she wasn't. I ran up to my door and unlocked it, then as soon as it was open, I started calling out my girlfriend's name at the top of my lungs as I ran for the stairs. But I hadn't even touched the bottom step before a policeman appeared from the living room and said, "It's all right, mate. She's in here. Everything's fine." He said, "Everything's fine," but he meant nobody's hurt, because my girlfriend was anything but fine when I saw her. The police had only been there a few minutes, so she was still in these floods of tears from all the fear, but also the relief of those two policemen having arrived when they did. She ran up and tried to give me this big hug when I walked into our living room, but then we had this really quite surreal moment of her stopping dead when she saw the state of me. She had tears in her eyes, snot coming out of her nose, and she pointed at my shirt and asked, "Is that puke?" I explained I vomited on myself when I'd been running home to help her, and then got her crying again. She later said it was because she realized how helpless I must have felt, and she was exactly right. I've never felt so powerless in my entire life. After changing my shirt and giving myself a little baby wipe bath, I went back downstairs and made a cup of tea for me and my girlfriend. She hadn't fully explained to the police how everything had happened yet, because the first thing they did when they got there was search the house to make sure it was safe, and that meant that I got to be there when she told them the full story. Not long after I called her to tell her that I was going to be late, my girlfriend was in the kitchen making us a bit of food when she suddenly heard a noise coming from the window in her back pantry. It was only quite a soft sound, so she thought that it might have been one of the stray cats she loved to feed, having smelled bacon on the grill. But when she walked into the back, she saw that it wasn't a cat climbing through the window. It was a man, and he was squeezing himself through. She said he was already head and shoulders through when she found him, and while he was wearing a ski mask type thing so she could only see his eyes, she said they practically lit up when he saw her. She thought that he might slither back out and run off once she caught him, but seeing her only seemed to make him even more determined to squeeze his way through, and that's when she ran upstairs to hide under the bed. She said that she could hear him from her hiding place, going from room to room, but he wasn't searching for phones or laptops or game consoles. He wasn't interested in any of that. He was interested in her. She told the police about texting me and how she'd remembered something about how deaf people can use a 999 text service. She tried that, but didn't know that you had to register before you could use it, so none of her texts got a reply. Then by the time I texted her asking if she was okay, the man who broke in was so close she was scared he'd hear her thumbs tapping her phone screen if she tried replying, so she stopped altogether. She said that she was so scared she barely even breathed when he walked into our bedroom. She just laid there on her front, hand over her mouth, watching his black trainers stepping around our carpet very softly, like he was trying to creep up on wherever she was hiding. She said that gave her hope at first, how she saw that as a sign he didn't know where she was yet. But after walking around the room a bit, the man stopped dead and stayed still, facing the bed. My girlfriend said that she thought that was it, that he was about to reach under the bed, drag her out kicking and screaming, and then do God knows what to her. But instead, the man started laughing, softly at first, but then it grew into this almost childish giggle. She kept waiting for him to pounce and started planning how she was going to bite him and scratch him, anything to keep him off her. But instead of lunging for her, he walks towards her dresser and then towards the mirror. He stayed at the mirror for a second, and my girlfriend thought that he was sort of looking at himself or something. But when they both heard the police sirens, he bolted out of our bedroom, ran down the stairs, and escaped out the back door, which is how the police got inside to look for my girlfriend. It was only when she was sure that it was police and not a trick by the man looking for her that she came out of hiding and made herself known. But when she saw something written on our bedroom mirror, she said that she burst into tears. He'd used one of her lipsticks to write 3 little words: I found you. Like it was some sick game that he was playing for kicks. She said she couldn't give them much of a description because all she'd seen properly were his eyes and his trainers, and even then, she couldn't be sure what color his eyes were, only that his trainers had been black Nikes with a dark red swoosh. The police said that it could actually be really helpful, and she might be surprised how often people get caught because of what shoes they're wearing. That gave us hope that the person might be found and arrested, but after weeks and weeks of hearing nothing about it back, we called the number that we'd been given to be told that there had been no progress whatsoever. I wasn't surprised because, despite being outwardly very hopeful for my girlfriend's sake, I didn't expect much from the police. I'm not saying that they don't work hard at their jobs, but without fingerprints or DNA, and without any real description to go on, there wasn't much that they could do except advise us to keep our windows all closed and locked at night. But that's just the thing. My girlfriend hadn't just left the back window open. It was November, so it was bloody freezing out. She literally only opened it minutes before she put the bacon on, so the smell of it wouldn't build up in the kitchen, and that's what makes us think that either A, she was extremely unlucky and opened the window just in time for some creeper to pick his moment to peek over our back wall, or B, whoever tried climbing through that window had been watching her as he opened the window and realized she'd gifted him a way in. Both options made me feel sick to think about and meant that we didn't mind shelling for some extra locks on the front and back doors. We're also mega vigilant about open windows now, even in the daytime during the summer, and my girlfriend, now my wife, never ever keeps them open at night when she's alone, not even during summer heat waves. It can get to be a pain in the butt sometimes, but don't get me wrong. But it's worth it to know that same horrible scenario won't play itself out again, because I'm not sure my nerves could stand another go. I figured you could use this story if you ever do a terrifying first crushes video or cruise ships or anything like that. It's the story of the scariest girl I ever met. So, young love. It's a beautiful, thrilling, daring, and usually a load of bullcrap. I was 16 when I had my first crush that felt like something more. 16 and bored out of my skull on a family cruise. I first caught sight of the girl when we were at the muster drill at the very beginning of the cruise. It was hot as balls out, and a lot of the passengers were clearly uncomfortable, probably traveling from landlocked or cooler states. We were setting sail from Port Miami, my home city, so none of this was very exciting or original to me. Others were a mixture of hyped up and heat-stroked, and as a teenage boy in the year 2000, I was completely over it. I looked around for someone who was sick of all of it as well as I was, and that's when I saw her, Sasha. She was an absolute dream girl for an alternative teenage boy like me, dressed all in black despite the baking summer sun, but barely covered up, if you know what I mean. I don't really want to get into it now, in adulthood and everything, but you gotta know that to the 16-year-old me, Sasha was the most alluring, beautiful, mysterious goth metal chick I'd ever seen in my life. This was from the area when people like us were into Nine Inch Nails, Tool, Pantera, maybe Slipknot and Marilyn Manson if we were forced to admit it. So imagine a dream girl who fits that mold, and that was Sasha. Of course, she was really a nightmare, but hey, is that surprising for a girl who I later caught literally growling at a 5-year-old girl? Now anyways, that's when I next saw Sasha. The cruise had departed for the Mediterranean. We'd had an early dinner, and then my parents had sent me and my older sister off to explore, which meant they either wanted to screw, gamble, or drink, which I figured would be their plan for most of the vacation, both on and off the ship. I wandered around until I found a little arcade, with a few token games, some video games, and even a few machines set to free play. A group of younger kids were crowded around a House of the Dead 2 arcade machine playing like crap. The beautiful girl I'd seen earlier was lurking near an ashtray smoking, which gave my dumb self a little thrill, and they were glaring at the kids. Every now and then she'd make a derogatory comment when one of the kids got hit by a zombie, or whatever those things are in House of the Dead 2 that look like tiny Michael Jacksons. Now my sister, Robin, snuck up behind me and hit me for staring at that girl. She told me to play it cool, and then said that she'd kick the crap out of me if she caught me smoking. Then Robin very kindly disappeared off into the bowels of the ship, leaving me to make my own mistakes. Now, back home, off the ship, I was a shy and awkward kid who kind of skulked around listening to Korn, but I decided that on the ship, I was going to be a confident, cool kid who went around listening to Korn. Pretending like I hadn't been standing there spying on her for the last 15 minutes, I walked up to the girl and introduced myself as Robbie. Yeah, my sister and I are called Robert and Robin, geez. That's when I found out that her name was Sasha, and she was a misanthrope and misandrist. And that's actually what she said. Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm a misandrist and a misanthrope. and she explained that this meant that she hated men and then hated all people, and I pretended like I didn't know this and then pretended like I found it really cool and that I agreed. Yeah, men suck, I said, which seemed to make her laugh genuinely, which I took to be a good sign. And Jesus, I was such a cringelord back then. I wandered through the arcade talking about crap, mostly how everything sucked and the cruise sucked and how modern life sucked and our parents sucked and the kids around us sucked. Sasha told me about all the bands that she liked, which all sucked, and she told me that my taste sucked too, but also that it was cool. Sasha may have been dressed in black, but I can see now that she was one walking, talking red flag, and I would have recognized it at the time if I didn't have such a damn crush on her out of nowhere. I thought I was being really slick and smooth and kept asking to see this pentagram necklace that she was wearing, which, of course, each time it gave me a good look at her cleavage. Now, after a few requests to study it, I'd kind of realized that Sasha was enjoying the attention, and I relaxed a little, and then trying to be the cool guy who openly checked her out and hit on her. Now, for Sasha's part, the more attention I gave her, the more it seemed to spur her on to want to do crazy things. She led me to the back of the arcades and pointed out that the security cameras didn't reach this area. She knew, she said, because she'd been on this dumb gay cruise 1,000 times. There was a digital cornhole machine that could be used to get a bunch of tickets, and Sasha showed me how to use the chain attached to my wallet to crack the plastic around the ticket dispenser and cause a roll of tickets to come out. I hesitated until Sasha got angry at me, saying that I was just like the others. Now, nervously, I looked around, and then suddenly as I could, I broke the machine. A limp strip of about 10 tickets came flopping out, and Sasha took them, got a little sneery, and then immediately threw them into the trash. Now next, Sasha took me on a walk through the main atrium. She told me to stand on one side of the big central staircase and watch her as she walked through the crowd. I had no idea why, but I didn't mind having an excuse to stare at her, so I did. I got to admit, she was a master. She walked through the crowd, gently knocking into people here and there, and then being all sweetness and smiles when she apologized. At one point, I saw her gesturing to her leg and implying that she had some sort of disability, and an old woman even kissed her on the forehead, which made me laugh as Sasha's face turned to hidden horror. Eventually, Sasha reached me and dragged me out of the atrium. She found a secluded spot under the stairs in a staff-only area of the ship, which gave me a little thrill again. And there, she pulled a bunch of wallets and purses out of her jacket. She must have stolen at least 4 or 5, as well as a wristwatch and a bracelet. I was kind of amazed, but then horrified. I tried arguing with her that we'd get in serious trouble if she kept this stuff, and that's when she first started showing her true crazy. She leaned into me and whispered that if I told anyone, she would not only blame me, but also claim that I'd done terrible and unspeakable things to her to shut her up. Now, looking into her eyes, I genuinely believed her. And then she smiled at me and said something along the lines of, well, this wouldn't happen because, of course, I'd keep my mouth shut. And then she removed all the paper money from the purses and wallets and then threw everyone's cards and belongings down a garbage chute. I was horrified, but didn't feel like I could really say anything at that point. Somehow over the next few days, I kept finding myself hanging out with this Sasha, even though the novelty was starting to wear off. This was the point in my life where I discovered that I didn't care how hot someone was if they were an awful person. The problem now was that Sasha was kind of bullying me into spending time with her because I'd been present for some of her crimes, and I was too socially awkward and lacking in confidence to consider just saying, hey, I didn't do this. The girl did. For example, a couple of days after the pickpocketing, Sasha made me accompany her to one of the play areas for young children. There, she found a girl playing by herself and kept telling her about how someone had fallen overboard and died, and that she'd heard it was the girl's mother. The girl, for her part, didn't believe Sasha at first, but Sasha wouldn't relent. She described some genuinely very violent and unpleasant scenarios about the girl's mother being eaten by sharks, or dragged under by an octopus, or decimated by the ship's propellers. In the end, it got too much for the girl, who ran off crying, much to Sasha's amusement. and she bullied a few other little kids too, which just felt sick and tasteless to me. Now, another time she tried to force me to break into a vending machine, again in the crew quarters. She laughed and said that some loser on the crew would take the blame, so why should we care? At this point, it became obvious that Sasha was just trying to be deliberately cruel and unpleasant. I couldn't decide if she was trying to impress me or make me hate her, and looking back with adult insight, I think it was a little bit of both. Kind of sad, really, but at the same time, all I wanted was to be rid of her. I refused to vandalize the vending machine and stormed off to the sound of her trying to pry the keypad off of the front. Somehow, Sasha found me later in the water park of all places. I was sure that she wouldn't be seen dead there, but she showed up in a black bikini with a slur written on the crotch. And I could tell that she was trying to win me back over, and I had to fight all my teenage hormones not to let her succeed. When she reached into her bikini top and somehow removed a box of push pins, my heart sank. You see, the plan, she said, was to toss these down the water slide and see what happened. I said that there was no way I was going along with this, and there were little kids playing here, and also my sister was swimming with some friends. This was the first time that I mentioned my sister, and Sasha's eyes turned murderous. She demanded that I point my sister out to her, and then started asking me super weird questions, like if I thought my sister was cooler than her, or smarter than her, and then eventually prettier than her. And I'm like, gross, dude, I don't think about my sister in that way. But Sasha didn't seem to care. She was clearly furiously jealous of my sister for even existing, and this made her more determined to toss those pins down the water slide. I could only see one solution. I grabbed the box of those things from Sasha and then just tossed them over the side of the ship. The water park was on the one deck, so it wasn't difficult to send that box of pins falling hundreds of feet into the ocean below. Nobody even noticed. Now, I expected Sasha to be furious at me, but instead, she just sort of smiled and said that I passed the test and that I was a good person, so maybe I'd finally get my reward. Now, it was pretty clear what she was suggesting from her body language, and I hate the fact that I fell for it like some stupid teenage boy. Sasha told me to meet her back on the same deck after dark. There was a smoking area that some of the passengers came to at night, but it was mostly quiet and we wouldn't be disturbed. And then she leaped into the pool and disappeared into the crowd of people. I ate dinner with my parents and Robin in the fanciest restaurant that night, but I could barely eat anything, feeling a mixture of excitement and mostly nervous sickness about meeting Sasha. I knew she was bad news, and even though she was the hottest girl who'd ever paid attention to me, I knew deep down that it just wasn't worth it. I thought about bringing it up to my parents or Robin, but they'd all seemed to be having such a good time. My sister went off with some friends that she met on the ship, my parents went to an 18-plus cabaret show, and I just resigned myself to go and meet Sasha. Maybe I'd get something out of it, at least. I was walking along a small, shadowy deck leading to the main water park promenade deck when I felt someone grab me. I was slammed up against the railing, which came up to my chest. Sasha at this point was hissing at me, her face this just ball of fury. She was mad, so mad that I'd thrown her pins into the water. And then she started accusing me of being a perv, a creep, all sorts of things. She said that she'd kept some of the credit cards and belongings that she'd stolen from the crew and that she was going to plant them in my sister's cabin. I told her that she had no idea what cabin my sister was in, and Sasha proved me wrong by telling me exactly where Robin was staying and a whole bunch of other stuff about her. Sasha said that she'd ruin my sister's life if I didn't do what she said. I asked her what she wanted, and she told me that I had to climb over the railing and throw myself into the sea. She said I'd be fine and it would be funny, but I had to do it to prove myself to her and protect Robin. Now, I might have been a dumb kid, but even I wasn't dumb enough to think that you could just jump off the side of a 2,000-passenger cruise ship and survive it. There are 100 ways that could kill you. Sure, it could be possible to survive the initial fall, but even then I'd have to trust Sasha to immediately raise the alarm, trust myself not to get sucked under the ship, which would almost certainly happen, and trust the sharks that no doubt circled in the Mediterranean waters not to eat me. It had been a full sea day that day, so we were nowhere even close to land. What Sasha was asking me to do was obviously very, very stupid. I looked at her and just said, no, of course I won't do that. I figured that people don't really just successfully frame other people for random crimes, especially not weird, angry 16-year-old goth girls. I could just tell someone what Sasha was threatening and it would be fine. I guess Sasha knew that her threats were impotent too, because instead she lunges at me, taking me completely by surprise. She was a petite girl, but in that moment, she possessed a wild strength as she tried to push me up and over the damn railing. I don't think there was any chance that she could have managed it, but then she grabbed me in between my legs and began to squeeze hard, telling me to get the hell over the edge and into the effing sea if I knew what was good for me. I flailed my arms out and grabbed hold of the only thing I could, one of those plastic lifebelts that are positioned all along the decks of the ships. I grabbed one of the plastic handles, swung it forward, and smacked Sasha straight in the head with it. And I swear, I hit her so damn hard in my fury that the lifebelt actually shattered. I'd been lying if I said that I regretted it. I'd never hit a girl before or since, but I can live with myself doing it this once. Immediately I was calling for help, and some other passengers and the ship's crew eventually came running over. Thankfully, the deck had grainy security camera coverage, and there had been a few distant eyewitnesses too, so the reason for my assault on Sasha was eventually easily corroborated. I told the ship's security crew the whole story, admitting to every part that I played in it, staying silent while Sasha went on her pickpocketing and vandalizing spree. Now, a few times I saw a couple of the security guys sharing these very knowing looks, like my story was explaining some stuff. Things got a bit weird after that. My parents started monitoring Robin and I a little closer, so we didn't have much freedom for the rest of the cruise. Instead, we spent quality family time together on the boat and in various parts. I had no idea what happened to someone if they committed a crime on a cruise ship. My parents and Robin tell the story like I was worried sick about Sasha and the aftermath, and I guess I kinda was. She was a minor and I knew nothing about her. She said that she'd come to the cruise with her people, which I took to mean her family, but I had no real idea. And while we were still on the boat, despite my parents insisting I forget about her and try to enjoy the rest of the vacation, I begged them to see if they could find out what happened to Sasha. It was very odd, and to this day I still have no real answers about what became of her. When Dad spoke to the head of security, and I'm sure a little money changed hands to get this information, he admitted that they hadn't been able to identify who Sasha was actually on board with. She wouldn't provide them with her real name, and there was nobody unaccounted for on the guest list who matched her description. They said that this had to mean that she was the kid of one of the crew members, but if so, then she was on board illegally. And because of this, they had no choice but to keep her locked in the brig for the rest of the voyage. And since she was a minor, she couldn't be handed over to authorities in the Mediterranean either, and had to be processed back in Port Miami. Obviously, I never saw her again. Near the end of the voyage, Dad checked in with the head of security again, and all he could tell us was that there had been no further developments with identifying Sasha. So, to this day, the most memorable cruise I ever took was a terrifying one where the girl of my dreams tried to force me overboard and get involved in crimes. I never even got to find out her real name, and it's entirely possible that the girl I spent the first week of my vacation with was a genuine, real-life stowaway. Hi, let's read. Have you ever been to Covent Garden? It's a lovely touristy area of London with loads of shops and fun things to do. Whenever I'm in London for work, which isn't often, I try to spend a bit of spare time there to go shopping. However, every time I'm there, especially if I take the tube from Covent Garden, I'm reminded of something that happened to me over 20 years ago that may have been one of the scariest moments in my life. It was pretty late at night and I had been out in London with some friends. It was during my college days, and one of my old housemates had transferred unis to one of the London ones and invited us down for a flat warming party. The flat warming was the next day, Friday, but that Thursday I'd popped into central London to meet up with some other friends and hang out. I didn't get drunk, but was a tiny bit tipsy, and I found myself needing to get the tube back home to Southgate where my friend stayed. Originally, the plan was for the guy that I had been out with to come home with me, but things didn't really work out there. Instead, we went our separate ways, which is how I found myself trying to get home alone. Taking the tube, even late at night, is normally pretty safe and simple, especially on the Piccadilly line, so I wasn't bothered. By the time I left the bar, the weather was absolutely foul, full-on thundering rainstorm, and it was late October and it had been a pretty mild month, but now the heavens just split open. There's completely foul weather to match the mood that I was in after things didn't work out with the guy. Of course, I didn't have a bloody brolly either, so I dashed for the Covent Garden tube station, and I didn't normally like getting on the tube at the station back then for reasons you'll soon see, but this time I was like, screw it. Now, I've never seen Covent Garden station so empty. There was barely anyone about. The folks that were seemed as miserable and tired as I was. I remember there was a filthy-looking old man sitting near the bins, shivering in the rain. I ignored him and headed to the stairs. I have a crushing fear of elevators. It's not claustrophobia, but it's just elevators. That's why I normally avoid Covent Garden Station, especially as an exit, because there's a 193-step staircase leading down to or up from the platforms. And even though I was tired, heading down wouldn't be so bad though, I thought. If you've ever been to Covent Garden Station, the staircase is creepy, to say the least. It's a winding spiral staircase, fairly narrow for a public one. In the inner wall is a metal grate, like something out of a horror movie where the real world transforms into a sort of rusted-looking hell. It unsettled me at the best of times, but on this particular night, after I'd gone about 20 steps down, I heard lone, creeping footsteps behind me. For some reason, I decided to stop and listen, and the footsteps stopped too. I walked on a bit more, and the footsteps returned, and I was sure that it wasn't just some echo of my own steps. I wished hard for another late-night pedestrian to come jogging down the stairs, or for me to meet a crowd going up. And not much chance of that on these stairs. People normally avoided them, but especially tonight when everyone with any sense had already gotten indoors. I walked down a bit more and the person followed me. Their footsteps were light, and I became convinced that this was because they were trying to hide their presence. I stopped, and they stopped. I walked, and they walked. I wanted to start running, but I didn't trust myself, since I was still a little bit tipsy from the bar and I was wearing heels. I thought about slipping them off, but the idea of running down the Covent Garden stairs in bare feet, stepping on God knows what, sent a shudder through me. The person following me let out a strange, eerie whistling sound. I don't know what they were trying to achieve with that other than to terrify me, but terrify me it did. I started hurrying down the stairs and their footsteps sped up too. I paused, and again so did they. This time I reached into my purse and gripped my keys in my fist. Not the best weapon, but it'd do. For a second, I even considered turning around and marching back up to meet them, but I very quickly realized that'd be extremely stupid. Instead, I carried on jog-walking down the stairs. The person was following me at an even pace, and every now and then when I stopped, I'd catch a glimpse of their shadow just lurking around the corner. I knew if I could get down on the station and onto the tube, everything would be fine. With the whistling and the stop-start footsteps, it felt like my stalker was just trying to psych me out. They were toying with me, trying to scare me, but probably didn't intend to do anything physical or serious, right? I had to hope anyway. I figured that if they were going to attack me, then halfway down the secluded stairs of Covent Garden Station would have been the perfect place to do so, but instead they were keeping pace with me. I kept walking. My stalker let out another strange whistle, but now I was getting paranoid that they were actually summoning some other attacker, like calling on a gang or something. I remember that old movie that I'd seen at uni, The Warriors, and the line, "Warriors, come out to play," started echoing in my head. I started whispering it to myself like a mantra or sort of a war cry. I wouldn't be the victim. I was the warrior, and I'd fight anyone who cornered me in this dirty staircase that stank of piss and damp, and there was no way that I was dying here today on the damn underground, and thank God. My feet hit the last step and I could speed up a little, darting through the corridors to the platform. And that's when I heard the footsteps behind me speed up too. No way was I stopping to confront my pursuer now. There was 3 minutes until the next train if it was on time. Surely there'd be someone else on the platform too. It was never completely deserted. Other passengers would have come down here via the elevator. I burst onto the platform to see nobody. God damn it. I let out an actual moan of frustration, and the footsteps were echoing down the corridor behind me. "You okay?" The guy's voice made me jump. He'd been standing on the other side of a vending machine completely out of sight, and I guess when he'd heard me, he'd stepped out. He was a middle-aged guy in a very smart business suit. Totally normal, nondescript-looking guy. He held a briefcase, I remember that, and I found him instantly reassuring. He reminded me of my mom's brother, my uncle. Not wanting to seem weird or creepy, I walked over to him as quickly as I could and explained that I thought that there was someone stalking me down the staircase. The businessman seemed skeptical, obviously. Couldn't it have just been another passenger taking the same route? I explained the stop-start footsteps and the odd whistling, and he agreed that that was definitely eerie, but that I was fine now. I could just stick with him. And then he joked that whoever had been following me must have just given up because nobody was coming down the corridor now. Almost exactly as he said it, a figure emerged from around the corner. And you know when you can just tell that someone's behaving suspiciously? This girl was like that. She pretty much crept around the corner, looking for all the world exactly like a stalker who'd just been following someone down the stairs. She was peering about with these wide, frantic eyes of an addict. Her skin was dirty with sweat and acne, her hair plastered to her head with what could have been rain or grease. And she also looked to be no older than me, maybe even younger. If she wasn't homeless, then she was dressed like she could have been. Her clothes were filthy. One detail that always stuck with me all these years later, even when I'm not sure if I've embellished other things in my memory, was the fact that she wore mismatched shoes. One was a dirty trainer that had previously been white at some time. The other was a torn black Converse with neon pink patterns on it, and her footwear stuck with me this whole time. I don't know why. The businessman whispered that it seems like my stalker had finally shown up, and she must have heard him because it caught her attention, and that's when she noticed me and him. I've never seen someone go from acting so suspicious and threatening to being so terrified before. It was like the predator suddenly and immediately became prey. The girl looked at me and then looked at the businessman and genuinely froze on the spot. Then, honest to God, she let out an actual small scream as she looked him in the face. And then my stalker spun on her heel. I finally understood that phrase after this, and fully ran back around the corner and down the corridor. I heard the footsteps of her mismatched shoes slapping against the station floor and the panicked whistling that she let out as she ran. Next thing I knew, the train had pulled up. The businessman invited me to ride with him as far as his stop. I told him I was getting off at Southgate, and he was all, "Hey, me too, and we can ride the whole way together then." And so, grateful to the man for managing to scare away my dangerous stalker, I rode the short journey with him while telling him all about my uni course, my ambitions for the future, and talking about the 2002 World Cup that had just concluded the previous summer of all things. And then he got off at Southgate with me and even escorted me near to my friend's flat, which I thought was very kind of him. Relieved to be safe from my weird stalker, I went into my friend's flat, made a cup of tea, and thought nothing more of it. That is, until I told my friend the whole story shortly after. I was so wrapped up in explaining how my savior had scared the stalker off with a single glance that I hadn't considered the real question. Why the hell had my stalker, the young girl, been so utterly terrified to see the businessman? He'd just been standing there with me. He didn't threaten her or even acknowledge her. Sure, if she'd been planning to rob me, maybe it could have been frustrating to realize that I was now with someone, but this didn't feel like that. She'd come around that corner all furtive and sneaky, and then she'd seen the businessman and literally let out a scream and ran away. Maybe I've let my imagination add in the next bit, but when I think back on it, I'm now convinced that I saw a look of recognition on her face when she saw him. The girl was definitely following me with some kind of ill intent. She stalked me all the way down those stairs and then came creeping onto the platform looking for me. So she was a scary person herself. But what was it about the businessman that would send even someone like that running in fear? I rode home with the guy. He walked me almost to my friend's door, and I didn't get any bad vibes from him, but that doesn't mean anything at all. My stalker clearly did. I'm convinced that she recognized him and maybe even knew him, and he'd previously done something to her that was even more terrifying than whatever she planned to do to me. I have no idea what this is, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but I can't shake the feeling that my savior that night could have been way more dangerous than the person he saved me from. And unless one day I see his much older face on the news, I guess I'll never know. So I have a scar, a really obvious one too, running almost horizontal in line with my cheekbone under my eye. It gets a lot of attention from certain people who sometimes ask how I got it, but instead of telling them the truth, I always make something up like I got it after a bad fall when I used to skate. Now I'm not that super of a private person, and I kind of like telling the story when the mood takes me. It's just kind of a long story and one that sort of bums me out to tell because, well, you can listen for yourself. Now, many moons ago, a former friend of mine named Chris and myself decided to go to the state fair. It was kind of a long way away and Chris was my ride. But then after we hooked up with this group of 3 girls and hung out with them for a while, Chris slipped away from the group with one of the girls and they disappeared. I figured they had gone to find a little privacy somewhere, which was whatever, I guess, because I got to carry on hanging out with the other 2. But then come closing time, when all the stalls and rides started shutting down, I walked all the way back to where Chris had parked his car and found it gone. I was so mad, dude. Just out of my mind furious that he'd do something like that. Chris always had these a-hole tendencies when it came to the ladies, but this was on a whole other level. I remember walking around asking people near the cars if they were headed back to Cartersville, but no one was headed my way. And as the parking lot got emptier and emptier, I realized that I was going to have to walk if I wanted to get home. It sucks so hard walking all that way, and the whole time I'm just stewing in how angry I am that Chris drove off without me. I started hitting populated areas maybe 2.5 hours into the walk, and by then I'd calmed down a little, so I was just looking at all the houses I passed and thinking about how peaceful everything was in the middle of the night. The houses had long driveways, but not long enough that I couldn't see the front of the homes. So as I'm passing one of them, there's just enough light coming from the nearby highway that I can see this big, dark handprint on one of the downstairs windows. It was so stark against the lighter colored curtains that it stopped me dead in my tracks, and I don't know whether or not it was the texture or the way it was smeared, but a voice in my head started asking, "Dude, is that blood?" So instead of just walking off, I hopped the fence, walked up the driveway, and shined my phone light onto the window. The hand-shaped smear was blood red. Something had happened in that house, and if I later found out about it from the news or whatever, I was going to feel like one hell of an asshole knowing that I did nothing about it. I rang the doorbell a few times. Then when I didn't get any answer, and I didn't hear or see any movements or lights coming from inside, I decided to try and head around back to check there. I guess that probably sounds crazy to some people, who wouldn't dream of injecting themselves into a potentially dangerous situation like that, but I've never been the kind of person to just leave things be, and I guess that is what it is. Anyway, I hopped the second fence and then made my way into the backyard to see if I could look through a window or something. Most of the curtains were drawn, all the lights were off, and the back door was locked tight. There were no more bloody handprints, no cries for help from inside, just this dead silence out there. So with all my options pretty much exhausted, I decided to call 911 and see if I could call in a welfare check or whatever. Now I took my phone out, and just as the screen lit up, I heard the sound of a key moving in the back door of the house. I kept my phone ready to call 911, just in case the person unlocking the door was hurt pretty severely. But when the door opened, out stepped a man wearing a mask and holding a gun, who told me to drop my phone and get on the ground. I thought about trying to run, but trying to escape the way that I came in involved closing the distance between us, and if he was serious about using that gun of his, I'd make for a pretty easy shot if I tried to run. I had little choice but to do as he told me, so I threw my phone out in front of me and laid down on my stomach as another masked man appeared in the doorway behind him. Whatever they'd planned, a robbery or whatever it was, it obviously wasn't going as planned, and I could tell from the way they were whispering to each other that they were freaking out. The handprint was probably from when they'd killed the homeowner, and my heart sank when I realized that I was going to be next. When one of the men started walking toward me, I won't lie, I begged him not to kill me. I didn't say it straight up, I beg you, but I tried reasoning with him all the way up until he kicked me in the head and told me to shut up. I stayed quiet when he told me to look at him, and I figured my time was up right there. But instead of shooting me in the face, he wanted a straight shot at smashing the grip of his pistol into my face and jaw, I'm guessing in the hopes it'd knock me out. And I knew well enough to play possum after the first hit, which is the one that gave me my scar. But he decided to give me another lick before he was satisfied that I was out. I heard him pick up my phone and toss it, and I waited until I felt like it was safe for me to move again, which was only a few minutes later after I heard a car speed off in the street out front. I had to keep on my walk, like I should have done to begin with, and wait for a passing car so I could flag it down and get help. Luckily, the first one that came my way ended up stopping. The two folks in the front seat were kind enough to drive me to the emergency room, and they let me use their cell phone to call the cops on the way. An officer met me at the hospital while I was still getting stitches, and I gave him a pretty basic account of what happened before getting a cab home from the hospital. I thought that it was the last that I'd hear of it, as surely the cops would be much more interested in whatever had happened at that house. They were, I guess, but I still got a call from them, and a pretty serious one too. They said that I needed to come down to the sheriff's office to talk to a detective there. They weren't pushy about it, but it was clear that I didn't have a choice in the matter, so I went over to talk to this lady from the state police. Now, I've been hoping whatever had happened had been non-fatal, but I know that that was just wishful thinking, and when the detective said the homeowner had been murdered, I honestly wasn't surprised. But the detective then said that I needed to be cleared as a suspect because they still didn't have a full picture of what had happened that night, and that was something that I hadn't considered. I was only too happy to cooperate, as I obviously had nothing to hide, but while getting fingerprinted and having my cheek swabbed for DNA, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't nervous as I thought about wrongful convictions and all that kind of stuff. The good news came days later. My story checked out, and I wouldn't be hearing from them again unless it was to act as a witness in court. But as much as I hoped that that call might come one day, it never did. And to this day, I still don't fully know what happened to that poor guy and why those masked men broke in and killed him. When I was young, I went to college in San Francisco. I often took the bus through the city to visit friends or go to the library. Mostly I hated riding the bus. It stank, the people were weird and rude, and I often got hit on or catcalled. Usually I didn't fear for my life though. But that day was different. I was sitting around the middle of the bus next to a rough-looking guy in worn-out casual clothes. He kept checking his watch and muttering, looking out the window to his left as if it could hurry the bus up. I was barely paying attention to this guy, though. I was looking at a guy a few seats down who was scratching his neck and fidgeting in his seat. He was this white, pale, and sweaty-looking dude, and he looked like he was burning up, but he was wearing a thick coat in the summer, so go figure. He looked like a pretty clear H addict. You'd see them around San Francisco sometimes, and he usually just made me feel sad. Now, this guy was giving off some seriously bad vibes, though, jerking and looking around like he was scoping out the other passengers. I watched as his eyes fixed on an old man across the aisle and 1 or 2 rows ahead of him. The bus traveled on for a few seconds with nothing happening, but I could see the sketchy guy focusing on the old man and staring at him. Eventually, this shifty guy dragged himself from his seat and stumbled across the aisle to where the old man was sitting. He leaned in and grabbed the old guy's shoulder. The old guy looked at him with clear alarm and fear, and the twitchy guy whispered something that I couldn't hear and then reached into his back pocket. I watched as he pulled out his switchblade. Now, I wasn't having any of this. Immediately, I started to get to my feet. The knife guy hadn't seen me, so I could maybe sneak up on him and hit him or grab him. And then something happened that took me completely by surprise. The rough-looking guy sitting next to me grabbed my arm and pulled me back down into my seat. He said something to me, like, "Don't be an idiot, hero." Then I thought he said that he would cut me if I intervened. I just slumped back into my seat in terror, thinking that there were 2 knife men on the bus, maybe in on it together, and I was going to get robbed by this other guy. And then he surprised me by climbing over me and into the aisle. The guy then launches himself down the aisle, screaming, "Freeze! This is the police," or something like that. Now, the knife guy whirls around, very jumpy, sweaty, and instinctively raised the knife to protect himself from the charging off-duty cop. And at that exact second, the bus driver slams on the brakes, sending the cop tripping forward. He fell directly onto the blade, and I swear everyone in the bus gasped in unison as they heard the sound of the knife stabbing into him. The off-duty cop stumbled backwards, clutching at, thank God, his arm. Now, the knife was sticking out of his bicep, where he'd apparently managed to swivel during his fall. The strung-out dude was staring at his hands, head jerking back and forth between them, genuinely looking like a cartoon. Now, it would have been funny if he hadn't then advanced towards the fallen cop and reached for the knife. Then the biggest twist yet happened. The old guy stood up out of his seat and slammed the knife guy into an arm lock. He clearly didn't have much strength. He was an old dude, but he knew the technique, and he was able to restrain him long enough to knock the guy to the ground. A few of the other passengers then piled onto him in the aisle and held him in place. For my part, I ran to the stabbed cop to check if he was okay. He was bleeding a lot, and at first my stupid self went to remove the knife, but he snapped at me not to. Eventually, we arrived at the bus station where on-duty cops were called, and that's when I found out for sure that the stab guy definitely was an off-duty cop. He even apologized for being rough with me and thanked me profusely as he was treated on the back of the ambulance. The old guy was a retired disabled Vietnam vet, and I don't mean to make him out as some kind of action hero in my story. It was very much normal old guy grabs a young junkie, but he definitely knew what he was doing and definitely would have been able to take the guy down solo in his youth. The twitchy strung-out guy was carted off by the cops and presumably went to jail. I wasn't really the one at risk, but it was still a scary-as-hell situation. It made me very jumpy riding on the bus for years after that. My name's Susie, and I'm from London, and I used to work in a restaurant that finished quite late on weekends. Whenever I finished a shift, I'd take the exact same route home, which involved walking through a massive construction site that had a sort of pedestrian walkway running through the middle of it. It was lined with these tall gray barriers interspersed with adverts for the building firm. Ironic given that they couldn't build it in a straight line, and their efforts resulted in an awkward zigzagging pattern where you sometimes got jump scared by random dog walkers as you reached a zig or turned onto a zag. And this was clean and shiny when it first went up, but over time, it started to smell a bit like piss, and no surface stays clean in London for long. It's like the graffiti artists can smell them. But as grim as it was, I sort of got used to walking down that horrible little passageway, and the jump scares weren't as bad once you knew that they were coming. But this isn't about anyone jumping out at me or chasing me down the narrow walkway. It's about something that appeared on the wall one day. As I mentioned, the passageway's gray metal walls ended up extensively graffitied, and throughout the many, many times I walked down it, I became quite familiar with a lot of the art on display. There were some quite nice pieces of art and then some not so nice ones too, and I could recognize which ones were old and which ones were brand new. So that night when I was walking down the passageway, I noticed a newer piece of graffiti that must have been daubed there after I'd walked down it the previous night. It wasn't like the others. There wasn't a picture, name, or slogan. It looked more like a note, a letter even, and someone had written, "Read me" at the top of it. I wasn't intending on reading it, I just wanted to get home and get in the bath. But when I saw who the note was addressed to, I couldn't help myself because it was addressed to "Wine Bar Girl Who Walks Here Most Nights." I can't remember what the rest of it said exactly, as I only skimmed it before walking off at double speed, but as much as it pains me to do so, I can sum it up quite succinctly with the following. It said that I was pretty, and that someone was watching me, and that this person would like to bash my pretty face in with a brick when they were finished violating me. I recall just being like, oh my God, as I walked off twice as fast as before, and somehow I got home safely without any sort of confrontation with whoever wrote that note. But I also ended up crying my eyes out in the bathtub, wondering how people can be such freaking creeps. I started getting taxis home from then on, at least until I changed jobs and didn't have to commute home at night anymore. But even so, I've never forgotten that stomach-churning terror I felt when I realized that note was addressed to me. So long story short, this date was a bust. I'd been out with this person called Dalston with this chick and thought that it was going great. And right at the end of the night, she said something so stupidly ignorant that the idea of inviting her home with me was just right out the window. I can't even remember what it was now. It was the 90s. Everyone was ignorant. Probably wasn't even that bad. Either way, it led me to taking the dreaded night bus home. So, picture it. I was a foppish, drunk little so-and-so riding high on my self-righteousness, having just kicked a hot girl to the curb and turned down a night of intercourse to make whatever moral stand I was making. And so naturally, about 5 minutes into my bus ride, I was down regretting absolutely all of my life choices and feeling a little furious with myself. And maybe that's why, when the mouthy punk started calling me all manner of F-bombs and G-bombs and other bombs, I didn't stay quiet. Now, I know that I should have. I should have weathered the storm of insults to my masculinity and sexuality and kept quiet like a good little night bus traveler, like we're supposed to. Instead, I turned around in my seat and told them exactly where they could shove their Doc Martens. And they were the only other two passengers on the bus. One of them was a lanky-looking guy with some spiky red mohawk, and the other was a big chap with green and black hair shaved as sort of a side parting. Now, I couldn't tell if he was all muscle or just fat. Both of them were absolutely foul-mouthed, though, and I told them to stick their boots in each other, and they were floored in silence for a moment. And then, like hooting hyenas, these two idiots began rattling my seat, shaking and punching it without actually hitting me directly. One of them started slapping the bus window, and I just had enough. They'd been sitting on the back row when I'd gotten on, so I'd sat somewhere in the middle, and they'd clearly moved to be behind me. There weren't many rows that I could move forward, but I tried anyway, and about halfway between where I'd started and the driver, I don't know why I thought that this would somehow cause them to leave me alone. Obviously it didn't, and this sign of weakness and fear caused them to just clatter their way down the aisle and jump into the seats behind me. Now cue some more slurs and insults, and one of them ranting about how I'll cut you real good, you little fancy lad. And I was riding the blue balls high and gave them a few more choice words of my own. I caught sight of my driver up front, and she was shaking her head at me, giving me a look sort of like, you know better. And I knew her vaguely. She was this larger black woman who I'd met on the night bus a few times in the past, and was always a good laugh. I somehow hadn't noticed it was her driving when I got on the bus. I guess because I was still sad about my lack of a successful date. I stood up to move again, but once the punks grabbed me and pushed me down in the seat. Oh no, you did not just lay hands on me, I thought, you little rat. And I thought about turning around and just absolutely lamping on one, but I knew that I'd land myself in trouble with the law if I tried. Instead, I tried to get up and move again, and again, this punk pushed me back down in the seat. I tried again, he pushed me back down, tried again, and this time, the punk pulled me down so hard that the back of my head knocked against the back of the seat with this very loud crack. The driver shouted at us all to settle down. I said something insulting to them and then quickly left my seat and moved right back behind the driver. I asked her when the next stop was, and she said not for a couple of minutes, but she'd make those punks get off there and not to leave because she thought they'd follow me. And then once again I got back to my seat, and once again they resumed with their slurs and insults. I guess they liked the sound of cracking my head against the back of the seat too, because now one of them did it deliberately, grabbing me around the forehead and pulling my neck back until I was choking. I shook him off and scrambled across the aisle and back a few seats, sort of scrambling my way to safety. These punks got up, absolutely mad at me for daring to shake off their assault, and the bus driver started screaming at them to sit down and leave me alone, but instead they both crowded into the aisle and turned on her. This bigger punk, who I could now see was pure muscle, told the driver he was going to make her wish that she'd never been born. And that's when he pulled an honest-to-God hunting knife out of his belt. I had no idea what happened next until a few moments after. That's when he pulled an honest-to-God hunting knife out of his belt. I had no idea what had happened next until a few moments afterwards. There was the sudden burst of speed, and then an even more sudden stop. The big punk flew forward through the air, his knife clattering into the aisle, and hit the dashboard so hard that I heard the crunching of a bone over the splintering of metal and glass, and the beeping of the bus horn. The punk then crumbles to the floor, flat out unconscious, and the driver was up and out of her seat yelling at the now open door for someone to call the cops. Then she threw herself onto the other punk, slamming him to the ground and pinning him there, where she then proceeded to legitimately sit on this fella. I took her cue, a little shell-shocked, and kind of ambled over to the unconscious punk and made sure that he was still unconscious, and then shortly afterwards the police did arrive. So what happened, right, was the bus driver had taken an unconventional emergency approach and crashed the bus directly into a wall in an attempt to disrupt the punks from stabbing her or me, and was kind of a genius idea if extremely reckless. The cops took these two yobos away, interviewed me, and then let me go. And I am pleased to report that the bus driver kept her job because I saw her driving the night bus a few more times after that. To this day, she remains my hero, the bus driver who saved me from potentially getting fatally stabbed by risking her life and livelihood to drive into a freaking wall. A very terrifying yet epic night bus journey. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit that follow button to be alerted of our weekly episodes every Tuesday at 1 p.m. EST. And if you haven't already, check out Let's Read on YouTube, where you can catch all my new video releases every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you in the next episode.